Hey, everybody, real quick, before we get into the Season 4 recap of Succession, if you need a Season 3 recap, just hit the tab in the upper right-hand corner. It'll take you right to it. Season 4 picks up a couple months after the ending of Season 3. There's a lot going on with the Roy family. Logan is planning on selling Waystar in 2 days. That's pretty stressful, as well as a very important election that's going down in 2 weeks. Although Logan thinks that his guy is going to end up winning, which will ultimately benefit him. It's also his birthday, which means a birthday party. There's a lot of people there, none of whom Logan actually wants to hang out with, and that includes cousin Greg, who ends up bringing a rando date. Carrie has to pull Greg aside and say, "Who is she?" You do know that we're in the middle of a very highly contested election. Your uncle's on the brink of a very large sale, and he's also scoping out a very sensitive acquisition, and you bring this random girl here? Are you certain she's not going to leak details right before our big board meeting? Do you know she's not a hostile corporate asset? And Greg doesn't know that. All he knows is he likes her. While he does get yelled at about bringing her, she ultimately gets to stay and stick around. 3 people who are noticeably absent from this birthday party are Logan's kids. With the failed takeover of their family's company, Shiv, Roman, and Kendall have pivoted. They're now looking to start their own media conglomerate, and they're calling it The 100. But as they're ready to make their pitch to investors, Shiv gets a phone call from Tom. After what happened, they've decided to go through a temporary separation, although it doesn't appear to be temporary at all. Tom called Shiv because while they agreed that they could see other people, there was one person that Tom saw recently that he feels like he should make Shiv aware of, Naomi Pierce. Shiv can't quite figure out why Tom is calling. It seems like he's just bragging about the fact that he's dating her brother's ex. But Tom tells her it's a social thing. It's not sexual at all. We're not dating. The only reason he's actually giving her this phone call is because he bumped into an acquaintance that Shiv knows, and he doesn't want her finding out like that. Shiv asks Tom, well, then if it's not sexual, why are you meeting with her? But Tom just says, take care, Shiv, and hangs up the phone. But now Shiv is wondering why exactly would Tom meet with Naomi Pierce. She storms back into the house with Kendall and Roman and starts asking Kendall if he knows anything because him and Naomi did date. And in the middle of the initial shock that Tom and Naomi might be dating, Kendall gets his answer. One of the Pierce cousins was tagged on Instagram by Greg's date, who is at Logan's birthday party. The fact that Tom was meeting with Naomi, the fact that this other Pierce cousin is at Logan's birthday party, now it's got Roman, Shiv, and Kendall wondering if their dad is trying to set up an acquisition of Pierce. That has always been Logan's white whale, and it does make a lot of sense. So they start wondering, maybe we should sneak in and take the deal. They figure out that they probably could get enough money for it. Roman seems to be the only one that wants to stick with the idea of the 100 and do their own thing, but Kendall and Shiv want to take Pierce, which is the trusted brand that people know. They feel like it's more of a sure thing, and while they don't come right out and say it, they like the idea of screwing over their dad. They put some feelers out to Nan Pierce, and she's very indecisive. She basically tells them, yeah, we are selling, we do have the parameters of a deal, but we want to lock down a deal tonight. And after a little bit of Shiv's sweet-talking, she agrees to meet with the kids, so they hop on a jet. And the kids are right. Their dad is the one who is planning on acquiring Pierce. Tom was meeting with Naomi to hammer out the details of a possible deal. After Tom got off the phone with Shiv, he headed to Logan's birthday party and updated Logan on the fact that it's looking good. The cousins want out. The parameters of the deal are set. It's looking really good for Logan. Tom's feeling so good that he gets up from the conversation with Logan and starts giving Greg a bunch of crap on Greg's rando date. This poor girl named Bridget is now getting ripped apart because her bag is big. And amazingly, in the middle of Tom ripping her apart, she walks up to Greg and says, maybe we should go. Because she stupidly had an awkward interaction with Logan where she asked him for a selfie. And she doesn't really understand why that was a big deal and why it was a breach of protocol. All it was, though, was an awkward interaction. It doesn't even seem like Logan cares because he's stressing about the deal. He asks Carrie, when is she going to call, meaning Nan Pierce? And Carrie tells him, I think she just wants to talk to her whole gang. But Logan needs to get his mind off of it, and that birthday party isn't helping. So he, along with the security guard, head out to a diner. Meanwhile, Carrie decides to do a little bit of damage control. At this point, she has no idea that the kids are flying off to go meet with Nan Pierce with the intention of snaking their dad's deal. She calls Roman and asks if they would consider a phone call with Logan. Shiv asks if Logan's apologizing, and Kendall asks if Logan actually asked for this call. And Carrie doesn't really answer either, but says, I just know he would love to hear from you. She also admits, though, that it's going to be really difficult for Logan to ask. The best she can do is probably getting him to text a request for a phone call, and that's not good enough for the kids. So after a bunch of insults to Carrie about the fact that she's sleeping with a guy probably 3 times her age, they hang up and get their minds right to hopefully acquire Pierce. After a few hours, though, back at Logan's party, people start to wonder where Logan is. He still hasn't shown back up yet. Greg, however, didn't even notice that Logan was gone because he was too busy hooking up with Bridget in the humidor. He confides in Tom about this, thinking that Tom will congratulate him, but Tom starts telling him how Logan has cameras everywhere, and he watches them every night. He convinces Greg that he's going to have to own up to this to Logan, or else Logan's never going to talk to him again. Greg thinks that Tom is messing with him, but Tom is very convincing, at least to Greg. Greg's super gullible, so he believes all of it. And now he has to figure out the right time to go approach Logan and tell him, hey, by the way, I got an HJ in your humidor. But the timing for Greg can't be worse, because Logan storms back into his party after getting word that Nan has a rival bid, and he wants to meet with his brain trust. Everybody starts trying to figure out who this rival bid is coming from, and it's Frank who's able to figure out that it's got to be the kids. Jerry wonders if the kids can even afford it, and it's Carl who points out that with the sale of Waystar, they can liquidate their shares and they would have enough money to acquire Pierce. Carl then gingerly breaks the news to Logan and also says, I don't think you have anything to worry about. You're the solid option. But Logan is worried. He storms up to Tom and says, call your wife and tell her to get her own idea. That's when Cousin Greg decides to stumble in and privately talk to Logan, telling him what happened in the humidor. And Logan actually finds it hilarious. Tom, however, does not make the phone call that Logan requested. It's hard to believe that Shiv would even answer because she's in the middle of pitching Nan Pierce on why Nan should sell to them instead of their dad. And basically the message is, our dad is going to gut your company and gut your family legacy and we'll take care of it. Nan uses this leverage to create a bidding war. She doesn't like it, but she loves it. The kids are outside on her veranda calling their financiers to figure out how much money they can get. Logan is meeting with his team to try to figure out how much money they want to offer. Initially, Logan comes in at 6, and the kids come in at $8 billion. When the initial offer goes through and Logan doesn't get the okay that he won, that's when he demands that Tom call Shiv. And Tom tries to figure out where Shiv is at, what they're offering, but neither are giving an inch, giving any information to the other side. Logan doesn't really want to lose this deal, but neither do the kids. And they come in with a really high offer of $10 billion. An offer that Roman thinks is way too much money, but it gets them Pierce. Nan agrees to it. She tells Logan's group that she's not accepting any more bids, and Logan realizes that he just lost out Pierce to his kids. Logan makes Tom call Shiv back and put him on speakerphone. And that's when he hands the phone over to Logan, who yells at the kids, congratulations on saying the biggest number, you morons. And all Shiv, Roman, and Kendall can do is laugh, because they know with a reaction like that, they accomplished their mission. They pissed off their dad. After the successful acquisition, Shiv heads back into the city. She heads to the apartment that she was sharing with Tom. She needed to grab some clothes, but she runs into him there. It's a really contentious conversation. Shiv hurls a bunch of insults Tom's way, but Tom handles it pretty stoically. It's clear he's taking this breakup way better than Shiv is, even though she's trying to put this tough exterior out there. Tom really wants to talk to Shiv and talk this out and explain his side of things. But Shiv has no interest in that whatsoever. She tells Tom that it just didn't work out. They gave it a go, but it's time for the two to move on. So it looks like Shiv and Tom will be headed for divorce court.
In episode 2, the kids need to get to the city for Connor's rehearsal dinner because the next day is his wedding. The kids are celebrating their acquisition of Pierce, and they're getting ready to figure out what they want to do with it. That's when Shiv gets a phone call telling her that all of the divorce attorneys in New York City, at least the good ones, have been kept on retainer by Tom. And this is a play right out of Logan's playbook, and Shiv is furious. She calls up Tom about this, but Tom plays dumb. So she says, okay, well, if you want to be my dad's bitch boy, then deliver this bitch boy message. Tell him to stay the hell out of my life. And then she proceeds to hang up on him. When she walks back into the room, Roman and Kendall are laughing because they've obtained a video of Carrie trying out to be an ATN anchor, and she is terrible. I mean, it is hilarious how bad she is. But Shiv isn't in a laughing mood. She's in the mood for revenge. She decides to go out and call up Sandy. Sandy had proposed that the deal with Gojo wasn't all that good, that Logan was leaving a lot of money on the table. She, however, didn't have a lot of support for this, so she's going to have to go along with the board vote to accept the Gojo deal. But after this act of betrayal, Shiv decides, you know what, let me call Sandy and tell her, I'm thinking that maybe you were right. She tells Sandy that I'll keep you up to date if we need to have a meeting about this. And if they do, it's going to have to be soon because the board votes the very next day. Shiv then walks back in because all the kids do actually need to leave to meet up with Connor. When they eventually get to the airport, though, they get told, you guys can't fly out. Logan put the kibosh on the kids using the company helicopter, even though the kids still are technically the company. It's just a little way that Logan sticks it to his children. Now they have to find their own way to New York City. And Logan is at ATN, which is a very, very odd scene. But with the Waystar Royco deal about to go down with Gojo, he's going to be spending the majority of his time at ATN. It's going to be his new passion project, his baby. But still, him being in the war room, that's odd. And when Greg sees it, he calls up Tom to alert him since Tom is the head of ATN. When Tom eventually gets there, Greg compares it to if all the people in Jaws worked for Jaws. Because Logan is walking around with sunglasses on, looking like the Grim Reaper. Word has also gotten to Sid that Logan stopped by, so she heads down, and the first thing that Logan wants to talk about is, has anyone watched the tape of Carrie? Which everybody has, but you have to tread lightly since everybody knows that Logan is screwing Carrie. And they do that. Nobody wants to tell Logan that she's horrible, and Logan doesn't even want to tell her that she's horrible, because he says, well, I think it'd be unprofessional if I stepped in, so you guys have to make the call for this. And they say that she's great and she's raw, but she's got that something. The only thing that's true is that she's raw, and she sucks. He then stands up and makes an announcement to the whole ATN staff, and it's very Wolf of Wall Street-ish because he really gets the troops behind him, saying that they're going to build something special with the election just a couple weeks away. This is going to be their time. It really rallies the troops. But inside, he's worried. He hasn't heard a thing from the board, and with the vote just in a couple of hours, he is concerned. He walks up to go meet with Hugo and Jerry, and he shows up a little bit early, which is unfortunate for those two, because they were laughing at the carried tape, and Hugo gets caught. At that moment, though, Logan doesn't even care about the carried tape. He cares about tracking down the board to make sure that this vote is legit. And Logan hasn't heard from the board because Sandy and Stewie are trying to sabotage this vote. They go to New York City and they meet with the kids who eventually do show up on their own dime. And they have a 5-minute conversation with them, pitching him on the fact that this vote and this deal is not good for them. They're leaving a lot of money on the table. And initially, the only person who wants to listen is Shiv. Roman and Kendall are completely content with taking their bags full of billions of dollars and walking off into the sunset to go buy Pierce. They don't even want to entertain voting no on this. And Sandy's pretty transparent, saying, look, I'm prepared to vote no, but I also know that I don't have the votes right now. With you kids, I do have the votes. So let's vote no, table these talks for a couple weeks, force your dad back to the table with Matsson, and get some more money. Kendall and Roman basically tell her to go stick it, and Shiv, trying to smooth things over, says, I'll work on him. They then go to meet with Connor, but as they're walking into the building, Willa is walking out. And even though she says she's fine, it's pretty clear that she's not. She seems very, very frazzled. When they do reach Connor, he's sitting at a table by himself, and he tells them that Willa got up to make her speech, but then she said, I can't do this. She ran off into the bathroom, was there for 40 minutes, and now she's heading out with her friends. Connor doesn't know if she's ever coming back, if they're going to get married the next day. He seems a little bit frazzled himself. And while Shiv feels for her brother in that moment, she also knows that her, Roman, and Kendall, they need to talk about this deal with Sandy and Stewie. But Kendall and Roman don't want to talk about it because to them, it's a complete non-starter. They just want to go through the deal, vote yes, and move on. And they also just want to hang out with Connor for the moment because he seems like he's not doing all that great. Connor just wants to get his mind off things, so he decides to go head to, quote, an everyman bar. The whole time, though, he's tracking Willa's location on his cell phone, so he's pretty distracted. As he's doing that, Kendall gets a phone call from Matsson. Matsson tells him, look, man, I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I'm being told that you guys are considering voting no on this deal, so I'm going to tell you right now, if you guys vote no, there is no more money. Don't come back to me. Your dad might sell, but it won't be to me. And while Kendall says he understands, he starts to question maybe Shiv, Sandy, and Stewie were right. So he texts Stewie to find out some more comparables on sales of media conglomerates. He walks back into the bar with these comparables, and it looks like Stewie and Sandy are right. They're taking a bad deal. Now it's just a matter of getting Roman on the side of Kendall and Shiv. And as they're trying to convince him that this is a bad deal, because Roman's being pretty resistant to voting no, they see that he gets a text message from their dad. And they're wondering why that is, because up until this point, they've been a united front on not contacting him. Roman claims that, hey man, I just said happy birthday to the guy, that's it. And they check his text messages, and it looks to be that he was just saying happy birthday, that's all. But they kind of gaslight him a little bit, making him feel like he's being a traitor. Roman, however, gets the conversation back on track to this deal. And what it boils down to is Roman doesn't believe that Matsson is going to give up any more money. He thinks that if they go back and they vote no and they try to get more money out of Matsson, he's just going to say, you know what, screw this deal, I'm over it. And Shiv and Kendall think that this is worth voting no for because Matsson will give up more money. They're convinced of it. They say, we vote no, we table these talks for a couple weeks, we force Dad back to the table, he gets more money, we get more money, it's a win-win. By the way, this whole conversation is going down right in front of Connor. And even though Connor doesn't have a vote on the board, it does affect him because he does have shares. And he gets pissed off when he's hearing this because he, just like Roman, wants to take his money and go, do his own thing. But Shiv and Kendall want to be greedy while also screwing over their dad. They do, though, have to entertain Connor for the time being because he still is obsessing over where Willa is. And all he wants to do is go sing karaoke. So they head off to go find a karaoke bar. Back over at ATN, Logan tracks down Tom because he wants to have more of a deeper conversation about Carrie. He knows that the Carrie tape was bad, and he addresses it with Tom, but he does so in a very non-confrontational way. It's like the elephant in the room that these two have to deal with. They gingerly both kind of acknowledge the fact that it's a really bad audition tape, and Tom says that she's raw, and they can't start her out at ATN, but they have to start her down really, really, really low. And Logan seems okay with it. But Tom doesn't want to tell Carrie. He enlists Greg to go tell Carrie. Nobody wants to break the news to Carrie, fearing that Carrie will flip out to Logan about it, and it'll be their head on the chopping block. So Greg tracks down Carrie. He breaks the news to her, just like Cousin Greg would, and Carrie sees right through it. She knows that Tom sent Greg to do his bidding, and she's pissed about it. She also catches Greg in a lie when he says that they focus grouped her. And she vows that if this focus group didn't go down, it'll be his head on the chopping block. Carrie storms out of this quasi-meeting with Greg. She goes to track down Logan, and Logan's preoccupied because he's gotten word that Sandy and Stewie have gotten the votes to vote no on the deal with Gojo. He knows he's going to have to go grovel to his kids to vote yes. Luckily, he knows where they are because Connor was the one who tipped him off. Connor is all kumbaya. He doesn't want to deal with this family drama. He just wants to get married, have everybody there, and be copacetic. So shortly after they arrive at the karaoke bar, Connor tells everybody, hey, by the way, Dad's showing up. And nobody's happy about this. But a little while later, Logan Roy shows up at the karaoke bar to ask his kids to vote yes. And they're all enjoying it. No one more than Shiv and Kendall, but it's not like Roman isn't enjoying this as well. He's especially enjoying telling Carrie that she's not getting her own show at ATN because she was so bad on that tape. And it embarrasses Carrie quite a bit. But Logan makes his pitch, telling them that Matsson won't give up any more money. And he also does the one thing that no one thought he would do, apologize. But the kids don't really accept it because they make him explain what he's apologizing for. And he's a tough time doing that. The whole conversation is pretty personal. The kids reveling in their mini victory, but at the end of it, they tell him, no, go back to Mattson and get more money. And Logan is convinced that he won't give up more money. Right before he leaves, he tells them, you people are not serious people. And then he walks out furious. When he gets out of the bar, he turns to Carrie and says, I need to go meet with Mattson. Cancel the board meeting. It'll be me, you, Tom, Carl, and Frank will head to meet with him. No Jerry. He's adamant about that part. A little while later, all the kids leave the karaoke bar, and when Connor gets back to his apartment, there's Willa sleeping in the bed, so looks like the wedding's still on. Roman, though, didn't go home. He went to go meet up with his dad. He felt like that conversation got really weird and he wants to talk about it, but his dad says, don't worry about it, Roman. We know how they are, meaning Kendall and Shiv. He then sits Roman down and says, I'm overhauling ATN, and Sid won't be there. Roman gets up saying, I think I probably should leave, but Logan stops him and says, you're not Pierce. Smart people know what they are. I need a killer in there. More importantly, son, I need you. And Roman is definitely listening. In episode 3, it is the day of Connor's wedding, and Logan is not planning to attend. He's going to go to Sweden to meet with Mattson. And even though Roman had told him that he's on board with his plan, he's not planning on going to Sweden. He's planning on going to his brother's wedding because he's somewhat normal. Logan calls up Roman and explains that he really thinks he should go to Sweden with him. Thinks it's important because Mattson likes Roman. There is a limit, though. Roman's planning on going to this wedding. He's not going to go to Sweden. The last thing that Logan wants to discuss with Roman is the fact that he wants Jerry gone. He's planning on firing her. The mess with the DOJ, he thinks the fines were too much. What it boils down to is Jerry just fell out of favor with Logan and he wants her gone. But he wants Roman to do it. He knows that the two have a relationship, and he feels like it'd be easier hearing it from Roman than hearing it from somebody else. But that day is going to be Jerry's last day at Waystar Royco. And Roman is going to have to do it at the wedding, which makes him very uncomfortable. Once they hang up, Logan arrives at the airport a short while later and gets an update from Tom on what's going on with Mattson. Tom tells him that Mattson's not happy, but he still wants the deal. There's a reason why he's still taking this meeting. As they walk over to the plane, Logan tells Tom that he thinks that's going to be the day that he fires Sid as well. That's going to be great news for Tom, but Tom is also instructed to find out the moment that Roman fires Jerry. Logan wants to know. So as soon as he gets on the plane, Tom calls Roman up and asks, have you done it yet? And Roman snaps at him because he just found out he was supposed to do this about 10 minutes ago. And he also hasn't run into Jerry anyway, so he hasn't had the chance to do it. But right after he hangs up with Tom, he does run into Jerry. And it's a really uncomfortable conversation because Roman won't even look Jerry in the eye, and Jerry can sense that something's going on. Roman tries to say to her, hey, let's meet when we get on the water, maybe like 30 minutes, but he can't control himself. He tells her, today's going to be your final day at Waystar. My dad just thinks that you messed up the DOJ deal, and don't worry, he's going to pay you off. You're going to be rich, but yeah, I was sent to be the bearer of bad news. And that's what it is for Jerry. She's not happy about this. She's pissed. She feels like she's being cast as a sacrificial lamb for the DOJ deal that she feels like it was a masterpiece for her. Like she walked through landmines and got away with it. But it's not going to change anything. That day is going to be her final day at Waystar. Roman feels so uncomfortable about having to do this that he actually calls his dad up as soon as it's over. And Logan doesn't answer, so Roman leaves a voicemail saying, look, man, can you just tell me what your plan is exactly? I mean, are you just screwing with me and making me do crappy stuff? Because I don't really feel great about what I just had to do. And on top of it, your son's getting married today and you're not even planning on being here. So when you ever get a chance, can you just call me back and fill me in? Although Roman says it in the most Roman way possible. Not exactly PC. Once Roman hangs up, he heads up to the top deck of the boat where Willa and Connor are going to be married on. It's a private area where the kids can kind of just be amongst themselves and not have to worry about everybody else at this party. And it's there that Shiv and Kendall discuss what exactly happens if their dad can't reach a deal with Mattson. This is really going to affect their deal for Pierce. But at the moment, Kendall's not worried about it, so he feels like Shiv shouldn't be worried about it either. Connor then comes up to talk to everybody, and he's still under the assumption that his dad is going to show up at the wedding, even though Roman, Kendall, and Shiv know that that's not going to be the case. Connor was planning on what to do when his dad does show up, because it might be a little awkward with the kids there. But once Connor walks away, all of them realize that someone has to break the news to Connor because he's going to be pretty let down, and they nominate Shiv to do it. So she walks off to begrudgingly break this news to her brother that their dad is not showing up at his wedding. About a minute later, though, Roman gets a phone call from Tom, and he's annoyed. But Tom is kind of beside himself, and that's because Logan has collapsed in the plane. They're doing chest compressions, and they're not really sure what's going on. To make matters worse for Roman and Kendall, who at this point can hear everything because Roman put Tom on speakerphone, Tom is terrible at relaying details. But I'll give him a pass because it's pretty clear that everybody's frazzled by what's going on the plane, and he's kind of in shock. Tom relays, though, that Logan wasn't feeling well, went in the bathroom, somebody heard something, they went inside, and he was unresponsive. The flight crew is currently doing chest compressions while the plane circles back to head back to New York City. They're not quite sure if he's breathing or not, and they're not quite sure if his heart has stopped or not. Tom suggests that he put the phone up to Logan's ear so that Roman and Kendall can say something. Roman goes first, but he doesn't really know what to say. He wasn't planning on this. Kendall goes next, and he tells his dad, "I love you, but I can't forgive you." Roman tells Tom to stay on the line because they have to go inform Siobhan on what's going on. Kendall walks below deck, and in the middle of this party, he has to pull his sister aside and explain, Dad's not doing well right now. He quickly fills his sister in on the severity of the situation, and just like he was a few minutes ago, her world is suddenly rocked. By the time that Kendall and Shiv get back up, those on the plane have informed Roman that they're pretty sure Logan's gone. They quickly give the phone to Shiv once she gets above deck in the chance that Logan isn't gone so that she can say goodbye. Just like with Kendall, Shiv makes sure to tell her dad, "I love you." Even with all the bad blood that has been created in this family, faced with this situation, none of the kids are happy about this. They're all distraught at the thought of their dad dying. In that moment, they're able to separate the businessman from the father. The kids once again ask for an update, trying to get clarity on the situation, and Tom has to break the news that he's pretty sure Logan's heart has stopped. The kids start going through the 7 stages of grief, mainly Kendall. He takes the reins. He calls his assistant up because he wants to make sure the best heart doctors in the planet are available. He then calls up Frank because he wants to talk to the pilot, and Frank has to break the news to him. "Ken, I'm sorry, but you can't do that. They're not going to talk to you. They're busy flying the plane." Just like with Roman, Kendall asked for an update, as if he wasn't there when Tom gave an update. He's kind of just hoping that Frank gives him a different message, but Frank doesn't. He tells him, "Look, man, I don't want to sit here and sell you a bill of goods." I think he went. When Kendall walks back in, the kids are all going through the 7 stages of grief, and now it's kind of in the mix of acceptance with a hint of denial. The one thing that Roman's worried about is if the last thing his father heard was himself yelling at him in a voicemail, he then realizes that he might have forgotten to say "I love you." So he wants to get back on the phone to tell the dead body "I love you." Because while it seems like Kendall and Shiv have accepted the fact that their dad has died, Roman is not. He's clinging to the fact that they're still doing chest compressions, and that at the end of the day, they don't know if he's dead. They're not with him currently. Once cooler heads kind of prevail, the kids then realize they have another issue. No one's told Connor, and it's his wedding day. This thing's supposed to kick off in like an hour. Shiv and Kendall go to track down Connor and break the news to him. And Connor handles it the best. There isn't a whole lot of sadness with Connor. But then eventually the reality hits, and that's when it all comes full circle for him. And he realizes that he just lost the guy who he had spent his entire life trying to impress, and he wasn't able to. The final member to get the news is Cousin Greg. As Carolina, Frank, Carl were deciding to draft up a statement for the press, Tom snuck out and called Greg because he needs a favor. He needs Greg to head back to the office. He tells Greg that Logan is dead, and then says, I need you to stick to Sid like white on rice. I also need you to delete my folder marked logistics and then delete that from the trash. I also need you calling around with my narrative. I just lost my protector. Greg's going to do it, but he's also worried about his friend in that moment because Tom isn't doing great, even though he's trying to act like the normal Tom with Greg. But even through the shock, Tom is still a business guy, and he knows that if this leaks out, it's going to kill their stock price. As Greg is going off to sing Tom's story, Hugo has gotten word from the plane on what's going on, and he's going to be the kid's liaison on the ground. Shortly after Hugo walks in the door, Kendall gets a phone call from Tom on the plane to let him know that they've stopped CPR. Hugo then comes back to let the kids know that the statement is being drafted, but that doesn't sit too well with them. They don't like the fact that they're not involved with this at all, so they quickly get the people on the plane on speakerphone. They just think it's a little too quick and a little too callous. But Frank has to explain, look, I knew this guy for 40 years, and I feel for you guys. This is a huge loss, but from a board perspective, we need to get ahead of this narrative. Once they're done voicing the displeasure to the board, Hugo goes to get Jerry, because it seems like Hugo wasn't aware of the fact that Jerry was let go, and technically, while she was told, it wasn't made formal, so she still is a part of Waystar. After giving condolences, she starts discussing exactly what they're discussing up in the air. What they're going to do about a public statement. There's a lot of infighting as they discuss possibilities, which include just keeping the plane up until the markets close. Roman hates that one. Once it's just Kendall, Roman, and Shiv, Kendall tells them that this moment and what they decide to do is going to be their legacy. It'll be talked about in memoirs, in articles, on podcasts. So while they need to grieve, they also need to be smart about their decision making. And speaking of Roy kids making a decision, after discussing it with Willa, Connor has decided to go through with the wedding, even though it seems like no one's really going to be there. Well, a short while later, Jerry walks back in with Carolina on speakerphone because the matter has gotten worse for them. Carolina got word from a reporter who somehow got word that Logan is dealing with a health crisis. They don't know where this leak came from, and honestly, at this point, it doesn't even matter. They need to figure out who is drafting the statement. Roman, Shiv, Kendall, they go outside to discuss the matter, and they all agree that it should be them making the statement, not the board. The last matter is someone has to tell Matsson that Logan isn't coming, and they elect that Roman should do that because, after all, he does have a really good relationship with him. The kids are able to find their way off the boat and find their way into a helicopter to take them to the airport where the plane is landing shortly. Once the plane does land, it's greeted by the police and paramedics. Roman, Shiv, and Kendall, they head inside to get ready for a press conference. Shiv is elected to speak on behalf of the kids and make a statement. And she tells the world that Logan Roy is no longer with us. He passed away. While she says she doesn't take any questions, she does answer one pressing matter. What's going to happen with the company? Shiv tells them that the board is going to meet and decide who is going to lead the way, but the kids plan on being there to see it through. Once she's done talking to the press, Shiv is consoled by her future ex-husband, Tom. And once the press is all left, the body of Logan Roy is taken away as Kendall Roy watches from afar. In episode 4, it's the day after Logan dies, and everybody is meeting at his house. This includes a lot of people that honestly don't really matter, but they all give their condolences when Kendall shows up. Kendall is pretty surprised, though, because when he entered the house, one of the first people that he saw was Marcia. He just never expected to see her again, but yet here she is, claiming that her and Logan were still really close and talked every single night. When Kendall finally meets up with Shiv and Roman, he asks, what's up with Marcia? And by the way, where's Carrie? And Marcia has demanded that Carrie not show up. They then segue into talking about how everyone's doing. Roman's probably doing the best, and he thinks the reason why is because he's thought about his dad dying so much that he feels like he's already pre-grieved. But this isn't just going to be a grieving session. They're not all there to mourn the loss of Logan Roy. The board is meeting at 11 to decide the future of the company. It could go to one of the kids, or it could go to one of the old guard, who are also at Logan's house. This includes Jerry, Hugo, Tom, Carl, and Frank. This old guard goes and meets privately to discuss who they think they should nominate if the board were to take their advice. They discuss Jerry because she's done it before. They also discuss Carl because he has a little bit of experience as well, and he didn't get his shot. And Tom even throws his name into the ring, although that would probably be a bad look because, as Carl lays out, the narrative right now is he's a clumsy interloper that no one trusts. The only guy pulling for him is now dead, and now he's really just married to the guy's daughter who also hates him. So it's likely not going to be Tom at the top. There's also another issue that Frank hasn't discussed with anybody. It's a note that he found in Logan's safe. He reads it, and it's some wishes that Logan wanted upon his death. Most of them are typed out, but then there's some addendums written in pencil. It seems like Logan just didn't send this to his lawyer. But the one addendum is that he wants Kendall Roy to run the company. It appears, though, that this note was written about 4 years ago when Kendall and his dad were in good standing. And it looks like his name was underlined, although it could be interpreted as his name was crossed out. Now, since Frank found this, he could just dispose of it and not let anybody know about it, and then the vote goes to the board and they decide that way. Or they could honor the old man's wishes, although it's unclear what those wishes are. Frank wants some input, so he shows Carl the note, and Carl thinks they should get rid of it. And then Jerry walks in, and they show Jerry the note. What they decide to do is to tell the kids about it. Now, the kids are busy trying to get a hold of Matsson. Matsson had called, and Kendall told Roman, hey, don't answer the phone call. Let's get our ducks in a row first. When they called him back, Matsson didn't answer. His assistant did, and he tells them that Matsson isn't available. It seems like Matsson took it as a slight when the phone wasn't answered the first time, and he thought it was a power play. So this phone conversation between the kids and this Oscar fella ends up being a giant pissing contest that goes nowhere. They tell this Oscar fella that it actually is coming at a really good time. Matsson isn't available. It gives them time to pick a new leader of the company, and then they can complete the deal. But Oscar says, now, we don't want to lose momentum. Could one of you guys be here in like 24 hours to do this? And Shiv pops on and says, I'm sorry, but our dad just died. We have the election coming up. I mean, can you come to the States? But Oscar points out that Lucas is going to something called the annual retreat. It's annual. They can't just drop this thing. It's once a year. So they don't really get anywhere in this phone call. But after all, they didn't actually speak to Matsson. The trio then decides to kill some time in between the board vote, and that's when Connor shows up. Connor was really smart. He was able to talk Marcia into selling him the condo. So while the three kids are going to be worried about the board, Connor's just going to be worried about drapes, carpets, remodeling, things like that. They then get interrupted by Hugo. He first asked to speak to Ken alone because he found out that his daughter, who he claims he isn't close to, sold a whole bunch of the company's stock right before the announcement got made that Logan died. He swears that he barely talks to this girl, although when he's questioned about if the phone records will say that he did talk to her, he's not quite sure. But he just wanted to tip off Kendall that there might be a bit of insider trading going on that he wasn't aware of. They then get word that the old guard wants to meet with them in the library. As Kendall is making his way there, Tom intercepts him, and he starts kissing his ass a little bit, saying that, yeah, they've had their differences, but he's always respected him, and he's, quote, here to serve. And Ken kind of chuckles and says, Tom, I always liked you. I wish you well. And then he goes into the library. Frank shows the kids the letter, and it comes as a real big surprise to Ken, who never really thought that his father liked him, and he always figured that he was a disappointment to his father. But here's a letter saying that he was supposed to take over the company. Although, when Shiv looks closer, she says, I don't know if that's an underline or if his name's crossed out. That's kind of fudgy. And there's no legal backing on this. It wasn't sent to his lawyer. It wasn't in his will. It's just a note that you found in the safe. Kendall, though, can't get over the fact that his name is on this piece of paper, even though counterpoints are brought up, like the fact that it was written a long time ago. He doesn't hear any of that. Shiv, though, points out that it doesn't really matter who's in charge of the company. It's the board who will choose, and everybody still wants the sale to go through. So really, this is a title in name only for a couple of months, because whoever the board chooses is expected to sell the company.
But that doesn't mean that Kendall doesn't want to be in charge. This is what he's wanted his entire life, and now he's got a chance to get it. Tom then interrupts everybody and tells them that Marcia wants everyone to know Ron Perkis is about to make an announcement downstairs. So everybody in the room basically leaves except Ken and Frank. He confides in Frank that he never expected this because he always thought his dad kind of hated him, and Frank tries to make him feel better, saying that that's just how Logan was, but he did care about him. Ken starts to process all of this, and then he finally looks up at Frank and says, "If I can get them behind me, will you follow?" And Frank asks, "Do you really want back in? I mean, you seem so well." But yeah, he absolutely wants back in. The question is, can he get Roman and Shiv to back him? Because everybody kind of wants to be the top dog. Roman would love to be top dog, and he does know that his dad was kind of grooming him towards the end. And Shiv would also like to be top dog. But Shiv is arguably having the toughest time with her dad dying. She's standing on the stairwell and Tom walks up, and at first she's her combative self, but then she opens up a little bit that she feels like they killed their dad. That they're forcing him to go and meet with Madsen, putting him on the plane, ultimately resulted in him dying, not being able to be saved because he was 20,000 feet up in the air. Tom tries his best to make Shiv feel better, but it doesn't work. The kids all then reconvene and they notice that there are police dogs in the house, and they're kind of confused on why there are police dogs, and Marcia informs them that it's because presidential nominee Jared Mencken is en route, and Shiv doesn't want him showing up. But Roman points out, we probably should align with this guy. There's a pretty good chance he's going to be president soon, so it would kind of be in our best interest. But Shiv cannot stand this dude. They then stop arguing because they hear Ron Perkis start clanking glasses and start making an announcement. Everybody's kind of making fun of Ron as he makes this announcement. The kids are doing the exact same thing. They then, though, get condolences because Sandy and Stewie have shown up. They showed up to pay their respects, but they also showed up because they have a board vote, and the board vote is coming up. When Ken sees that the older Sandy has also arrived, he starts subtly making his pitch to the older Sandy on why he should be the one to take over the company. Sandy, and Stewie aren't the only late arrivals, though. Carrie, even though she was asked not to, shows up, and Marcia tries kicking her out. Carrie explains that she's got some stuff upstairs that she wants to get to, and she tries getting upstairs, but security stops her. Marcia is super, super cold to Carrie, which is kind of understandable, and even Roman thinks that Marcia was a bit too harsh. Roman walks back in to hear the Perkis speech, but Tom intercepts him. After he struck out with Kendall, he feels like maybe he can get in good with Roman. Roman, though, sees right through it and immediately starts mocking Tom for this. Meanwhile, Kendall has continued to make the rounds, trying to make his pitch, and this time it's to Stewie. Stewie's pretty taken aback that a day after his dad died, Kendall is already campaigning to get the job, and he also points out that the last time he went with Ken, it didn't go great for him. But Ken brings up the letter that his dad wrote and guarantees that this time it will be different, but he needs Stewie by his side with the board vote. Stewie asks him, "What's in it for me, Ken?" And Ken says, "I don't know. Do a solid for your oldest pal the day after his dad died." Stewie agrees, and now Ken just has to work on Roman and Shiv. They're busy kind of just chit-chatting about BS, and Ken finally freaks out at them and says, "Can we please talk about this situation? The board vote is coming up." So he's finally able to get Shiv and Roman alone. Kendall makes his case on why it should be him. Shiv kind of points out why it should be her. Roman points out why it should be him. But at the end of it, Roman and Ken team up, saying that it should be them to lead the way. They would like to include Shiv, but three's a crowd. It's too many people. They promise Shiv that they will not screw her over on this, that she will have an input, she will have say. They actually promise on their dad that they will not screw her over, but she's still a little weary of that. Ken reminds her that this will only be for a little bit. They'll do the deal, they'll spin ATN, they fold in Pierce. 6 months, 8 months tops, and all of this is equal. The three of them, even though only Roman and Ken are at the forefront. Shiv reluctantly agrees, and the three of them then go talk to the old guard. They make their pitch on why it should be Roman and Ken. And the old guard pushes back a little bit. They point out that it should be one of them, but ultimately they side with the kids. So when the board votes, they vote that Ken and Roman will take over the company. Now Carolina has to draft a statement. She grabs Hugo and they start working on it, but there is a slight issue. They don't know how to word it, so they're going to have to grab Roman and Ken and figure out what they want it to say. They're still kind of taking it all in and celebrating. Shiv, she stormed right out of there. She was not happy. As she's walking out, she actually slips and falls. Normally this wouldn't be a big deal, but she's been hiding something. Shiv is pregnant. She hasn't even told Tom yet. And even though Tom doesn't know this, he rushes to make sure that she's okay, but she stands up and assures everybody, "I'm fine, get away from me." And she leaves. Meanwhile, down the hall, Carolina and Hugo have grabbed both Roman and Ken, and they want to know how exactly they want this statement framed. The statement's going to be really important because when the markets open up, they don't want the stock to crash. Now, there's two ways this statement could go. The first one is to point out the close relationship that Kendall and Roman had with Logan, making it look like these two were Logan's choice. The second option is to paint Logan as nothing more than a face, a guy that wasn't making any decisions, and that whose health really prohibited him from running the company. He was in charge in name only. Roman takes the second option really personally. He doesn't want to bury Logan before the body's even cold. Kendall looks at Roman and agrees with him, saying, "Yeah, our dad just died. We probably shouldn't crap all over him." Roman, though, is so insulted that he tells both Carolina and Hugo, "Don't ever bring me this crap again," and he leaves. Ken, though, has other feelings. He goes to the bathroom and he just starts looking at his name written down on this piece of paper. Crossed out, underlined, he can't tell. But he feels like Roman was wrong. He walks back in and tells Hugo, "Hey, all that bad stuff about my dad, it's what he would do. He'd want this for the firm. So action that, but softly. Don't leave any fingerprints." Hugo's a little hesitant to do that, and he asks, "Can I get a sign-off from Carolina and Roman?" But Ken says no. This is on the down low. Just get on it. In episode 5, Roman and Kendall go back into Waystar as the leaders this time. They're welcomed back in. They get the lay of the land. They get updates, which include one from their movie studio. And the big summer blockbuster isn't going so well. They're going to need reshoots. It's going to be expensive. But other than that, there's not much to report. The real focus is on this meeting with Madsson. They're going to the summer retreat in Norway, but they're surprised because they get an email from Madsson asking for everybody, all the big shots in the company. And this is kind of unconventional. They're trying to figure out exactly what it means, and Jerry points out that it's probably a cultural compatibility check. If Madsson's buying the company, he wants to know who he should retain. On the flip side, this is good news, though, because it means that he still wants the deal. So everybody gets on the plane heading to Norway, including cousin Greg. Somehow he makes the trip. On the way there, Roman and Kendall are trying to go through the numbers to figure out what number they want to ask Madsson for. But Shiv is more preoccupied with this negative news story that's painting their father as nothing more than a figurehead. That Roman and Kendall were actually managing everything. And this was, of course, information that Hugo had planted to the press at the behest of Kendall, but Kendall plays dumb, actually calling Hugo into the room and saying, "Any news source that tries to defame our father, well, they're going to pay for it." In the front of the plane, most of the old guard is consumed with matching themselves up with who Madsson already has. So, for example, Carolina is the head of comms. She's matching herself up against Madsson's current head of comms because if he buys the deal, one of them's got to go. So there's a lot of nervous energy in this plane. A few hours later, everybody touches down in Norway. They arrive, they get settled, but they have to quickly head up to meet with Madsson. Carl wants to go over a plan, and Kendall points out, well, it's pretty simple what the plan is. Our stock price now is $144. Anything less is a disaster. Anything more than that is a success. On the way up the mountain, though, Roman gets a phone call from Connor. Connor's dealing with their father's funeral, and he's a little stressed out because Marcia wants to put their dad in a kilt, and Connor's completely against that. So he really just calls to get full autonomy on the matter. And considering Shiv, Roman, and Kendall are currently dealing with this Gojo deal,
they are okay with Connor dealing with a dead guy. Shortly after hanging up, they arrive at the top of the mountain with Matsson, and only Roman and Kendall go in to negotiate with him. It doesn't take long for the negotiation to kick off. They explain to Matsson that while they want to do the deal, the previous valuation isn't exactly what they were thinking was fair. And Matsson is still interested in the deal, but what he's interested in is acquiring ATN as well, which wasn't a part of the original deal. Acquiring ATN would screw up their entire plans on buying Pierce and integrating it with ATN. So initially, neither Kendall or Roman want to even consider that. They can't quite figure out why Matsson would want it, and he doesn't really want to tell them. But he does give a very hefty price of $187 a share. Now, it would be a 50-50 split. 50 would be in stocks and 50 would be in cash. But this deal is way too good to just ignore. Neither Kendall or Roman know what to say because it's such a good deal. But also, neither of them want to give up ATN. So what they end up telling Matsson is, we'll probably take it to the board and we'll reconvene later. And when Kendall and Roman end up telling the old guard, a.k.a. Jerry, Carl, Frank, they're over the moon. I mean, they think this deal is a home run. They're really surprised that the two kids were able to go in there and get the bump that they did. But before they can officially go through it, they want to run some numbers. Also, they want to discuss it. As they walk down the mountain, Roman and Kendall are discussing the fact that they don't want to give up ATN. They want to do their dad's old deal. And that's when they run into Shiv, who heard a troubling rumor that ATN has an open line to Jared Mankin's campaign team. And that open line is dialed in on Editorial Morning Conference. Now, if this news were to leak, it blows any credibility that ATN had. Shiv kind of looks at Roman to figure out if he knew about it, and he claims that he doesn't and puts all the blame on Sid. They then fill Shiv in on the deal, and they ask her thoughts on it, and she's cool with selling ATN. But Roman points out that ATN was their dad's pride and joy. He died trying to keep it. They kind of go back and forth with the pros and the cons of this. They don't want to seem too desperate, but deep down, neither of them feel comfortable giving up ATN. And they feel like they can get this deal done without giving up ATN. Shiv, though, can't figure out exactly what the problem is. But she's so frustrated talking to her brother, she says, you know what, just get the deal done. A couple hours later, everybody, from Matsson's team to the Roy team, all have kind of a pig roast together. It's pretty awkward because neither side is really getting along because they're all kind of eyeing up each other. Tom decides to go have a seat with Matsson along with a couple other people from his company and just kind of chit-chat with them. And it's really, really awkward. When cousin Greg comes over to join the conversation, Matsson asks, who is this guy exactly? And Tom says, yeah, that's Logan's nephew. He's one of our cousins. Matsson kind of chuckles and says, wait, are you guys serious? There's more of them. He then starts speaking Swedish and then laughing amongst his employees. And Ken gets really upset. He comes to defense of Greg and tells Matsson, yeah, I'm getting sick of this. And Matsson apologizes, saying, well, we need to occupy ourselves because we're waiting for a counter from you. Kendall's pretty surprised that Matsson wants to do it right then and there, but Kendall, along with Shiv this time, and Roman sit down to renegotiate. And it gets a little heated. Matsson points out that their stock price recently fell after the news came out that Logan died. They pointed out that it went back up by day's end. They then point out that they're concerned about Matsson's ideas for ATN. Their whole deal is a 50-50 split, so if Matsson's vision for ATN ends up tanking, well, then the value of the deal tanks as well. They're not confident that Matsson really can understand the American media market. And Matsson jokes with Kendall, yeah, okay, tell me more, Volter guy. This company is nothing more than a parts shop. It's a good parts shop, but it's got a terrible brand. And when Kendall says, yeah, I gotta say, I think you're wrong on this one, Matsson quickly shoots back, yeah, well, I don't care what you say. You're a tribute band. I'm trying to make you guys rich. So as for the offer, it is what it is. The Roys then walk away from the negotiating table with a little bit to think about. Because of this, Kendall and Roman don't really go to the happy hour-ish event that they have that night. Shiv does, though. Matsson introduces her to Ebba, who's the head of communications. And then he decides to start picking Shiv's brain on the deal. He's able to get Shiv a loan, and the advice that she gives him is, well, yeah, if you keep offering more money, eventually I think they'll say yes. He then pulls out some cocaine and starts telling Shiv that Ebba, His head of communications isn't very good and asks how Carolina is. And Shiv says, no, she's great. He hands the cocaine to Shiv, and she kind of swirls it around but doesn't do it, although she does drink. And I don't think there's iced tea in the glass. Matsson asks Shiv about what's going on with her marriage with Tom, and she fills him in. And then he tells her a story about his last girlfriend. After they broke up, he decided, as a joke, to send her a half a liter of a blood brick. Just frozen blood. Started as a joke, then it kind of got serious, then it's a joke again. Anyway, that girl was Ebba, so he's not quite sure what to do. He figures he could just deny it and lawyer up, but Shiv points out, yeah, she's got a freezer of your blood, though, as proof of that. Shiv then starts giving him some PR 101 advice on how to handle this situation. But she also says, I could get Jerry to help you out with this as well. She's really good for this sort of thing. And Matsson enjoys talking to Shiv. But both Shiv and Matsson are unaware that not too far away, Roman and Kendall are discussing the deal, and Kendall decides, we should tank this thing. The more and more that Kendall thought about it, the more he liked Power. He convinces Roman that the company is better off in their hands than Matsson, because Matsson doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So with Roman on board, they start planning on how to tank this thing and get Matsson to back off from the deal. Part 1 was having a reporter call up Greg, and Greg tell this reporter that things aren't going well with the negotiations. Part 2 was setting up a screening of that summer blockbuster, the 3-hour, uncut, unedited version, which is absolute dog shit. So the next day, when Shiv wakes up and there's a news report about how the negotiations aren't going great, she's a little surprised at that, and neither Roman or Kendall fill her in on the fact that it was them. They do, however, ask what she was doing all night with Matsson, and she says, I was trying to get some information, and I do think that he wants ATN. I think he's going to go higher to get it. Now, though, it's in the hands of Roman and Kendall, who have to go up the mountain to talk to Matsson for what should be the final negotiations. When they get up there, the first thing they talk about is this summer blockbuster and how it's got to get recut, and it's kind of a dog crap movie, but they can fix it. Matsson chuckles and says, guys, what is this? Are you trying to tank the deal? I mean, this news report today that we're not getting along, and now you're telling me that your big summer movie is crap and needs to get fixed? Is this how you guys do business? Kendall says, no, that's not it at all. We just looking at the models, we think that there's more value here. But, we might need to slow it down. Roman jumps in and says, yeah, we just need to slow it down. We've got the election coming up, and there'll be the transition. Matsson jumps in and cuts them both off and says, I'd prefer to do this with your dad. He was a prick, but he knew what he wanted. And the fact that Matsson called Logan a prick doesn't sit well with Roman. He takes offense to it. He then looks at Kendall and says, I need this deal done fast. But Kendall doubles down on the fact that they need to slow things down. This is a really big deal. And Matsson gets personal, saying that Logan would be disappointed if he saw his two boys right now messing this deal up. He then goes over in the corner to pee, and Roman just can't bite his tongue anymore. He walks up to Matsson, and he unloads on Matsson. He starts off by ripping Matsson for not giving them time on this deal after Logan died. He actually blames Matsson for their dad dying, saying that you forced our dad to come out here. It's on you. And then finishing it off with saying, we will never sell you this company. Oh, and also, I hate you. And if you tell anybody about this, I'll tell the board that it's a negotiating tactic. Is it? But no, it's really not. We're not selling to you. And Matsson says, oh, you just fucked yourself. Yeah, real good. Roman, though, has no regrets. And even when they get on the plane and head back to the States, he has no regrets about what he said to Matsson. But then they do get concerned when Frank gets a phone call from Matsson. Matsson's upped his offer to $192 a share. And everybody is pumped about this news. They look at Roman and Kendall as financial gods right now. They bumped them up $5 a share. I mean, they still have to run the numbers, but everybody on the plane is excited except Kendall and Roman. Because the negotiations were happening, the only people that knew about it were Roman and Kendall. Up until this point, nobody knew what happened on that mountain. But now, everybody knows that the offer is $192. And $192 is going to be really tough for the board to say no to. Matsson actually calls Shiv up and says, hey, take a picture of your brother's faces for me right now. And yeah, they look miserable. but then a few more faces in that plane get pretty miserable looking because Jerry gets an email of the kill list. The list from Gojo, if the deal goes through, on who gets severance packages. And it's pretty much everybody except Tom, Jerry, and Carolina. So Frank, Carl, Hugo, they're all gone. And they're not too happy about it. And maybe one of the reasons why Tom isn't gone is something that Shiv brings up to him privately. She starts talking to him about ATN, and he thinks he's going to be axed by her. But no, she actually does exactly what Logan would have done. She tells Tom, Sid's out. You're in charge now. In episode 6, everybody's in town for Los Angeles because they're coming up on Investor Day. It's the day where Waystar Royco starts pitching investors on everything new that they have coming up that will hopefully keep investors happy. And while he's not invited, Matsson just so happens to be in Los Angeles because he's refueling his private jet and he meets with Shiv. One of the things that Waystar is going to be pitching is something that Logan was working on before he died. It's called Living Plus. Essentially, it's a retirement community, but with a lot of bells and whistles that they're pitching. Matsson hates it. He has no interest in moving forward with it. And Shiv explains to him, well, we're still going to announce it because kind of look bad if we didn't. And he tries to remind Shiv that her and her brothers are nothing more than just house sitting at the moment. Of course, Kendall and Roman, they don't see it like that at all. As he's leaving, he does mention to her that things got pretty feisty on the top of the mountain, but she doesn't think anything of it. That is, until she gets to a meeting later that day with Roman, Kendall, Jerry, Tom, Hugo, a few others. And Kendall and Roman voice their quote-unquote hesitation with the deal, which no one can figure out why. They all look at it like it was a home run. I mean, they got Matsson to up his offer. That's when Roman brings up that Matsson flew off the handle on the top of the mountain. And only Shiv knows that that might not be the case. Of course, it's Matsson's word against her brothers, but either way, Shiv doesn't say anything. She just listened to her two brothers tell everybody that they do have some reservations regarding Matsson taking over the company. After all, the stock is 50% of the deal. If he tanks the company, then their evaluation isn't really all that good. Still, a lot of people in the room think that Kendall and Roman are just being a little bit reactionary, and the deal is what's best. After all, they're not selling to a nobody. They're selling to a guy with a reputation. A good one. Kendall nods and tells everybody, okay, well, we'll still go along with the deal. We just want to keep everybody up to speed. But once everybody leaves and it's only Roman, Kendall, and Shiv in the room, Shiv confronts her brothers on the fact that they lied. She's known them long enough to know when they are telling a lie, and she knows that they just told one of this entire group. She just comes right out and says it. You guys are trying to tank the deal. It's pretty obvious. They do end up coming clean saying, yeah, we're just not sure about the deal. And they apologize to her saying that they were going to come clean with her. They just didn't get a chance to yet. That's when they reveal to her that the plan is to not only keep the company, but also to integrate Pierce into it. And they do feel bad because this looks like they were dicking over their sister, but they swear that they weren't. Everybody actually ends up hugging it out. And then they have to go their separate ways. For Shiv, that means scheduling time to grieve. She has one of her assistants put one of the meeting rooms aside all so she can just have some time to cry about the fact that she just lost her dad. Of course, this grief period gets interrupted by Tom and Greg. And when Tom sees the state that Shiv is in, he feels really bad. He asks what's wrong, and eventually she comes out and says, yeah, I have to find time to do this. And he thinks that's nuts, but he also wants to be there for her in that moment. So they hug, he rubs her back, and then since grief is nature's most powerful aphrodisiac, they kind of end up kissing a little bit. It gets hot and steamy. While she was making out with her ex, her brothers had to plan for their investor speech. This basically means going over speeches that were intended to be spoken by Logan. While Kendall goes over the speech because he's going to be the one primarily making it, Roman goes to meet with the head of their movie studio. The meeting is supposed to be friendly, where Roman just tells her that they're planning on backing her 100% of the way, giving her as much money as she wants to go out there and make hits. But somewhere in this conversation, Roman gets insulted, and he ends up firing her out of the blue. When he gets back to the building where they're going to be having their investor presentation, Kendall is in full boss mode. He's having the staff build him what would look like a Living Plus home, and they have about a day to do it. When Kendall and Roman are able to actually get together, Roman doesn't reveal to Kendall that he fired the head of the movie studio, but that might be because Kendall kind of takes the reins with the conversation, telling Roman that he's got a big idea. Use Living Plus to drive up their stock price. They can do this by pitching Living Plus as tech. But if they can make a compelling pitch that can drive that stock price above 192, which probably is Matsson's max, then it'll kill the deal. Now, Roman and Greg, of all people, try to tell Kendall, this is going to be really difficult. I mean, you're pitching houses and real estate as tech. But Kendall is convinced this can work. He tells them we just need to get analysts to look at this company differently. In the middle of all this excitement that Kendall is exuberating, Jerry comes in the room and says, Roman, I need to talk to you right now. Because she found out about his little firing spree and she's pissed off. She confronts Roman about it, and Roman says, yeah, I mean, I kind of fired her. It's no big deal. You might have to walk it back. But Jerry says, this is a huge deal. You can't just walk around firing people. You need somebody present. You need lawyers. You need to clear it. But what Jerry didn't understand was that they gave Roman a little bit of power. And with that power, he is wielding a mighty sword. He doesn't care about the old rules. And at one point, he even says to Jerry, well, this is what Dad would do. And Jerry says, well, you're not your dad. And Roman gets really upset at that. He's super sensitive to when people point this out, even though it's true. Roman tells her that he might just fire her, and she laughs, saying, well, I'm not on Matsson's kill list. And he says, well, I don't care about the kill list. And that's when she kind of realizes what might be going through Roman's head. She says, Roman, you can't do this. Your dad knew. I mean, we're dead. Tech is coming. But Roman wasn't listening to any of that, and he tells Jerry she's done. He walks back to meet up with his brother, who is working with analysts to restructure this pitch. And that's when he tells Kendall about firing the head of the studio. And Kendall's cool with it. It's bold, but he agrees with it. Roman then tells Kendall that he fired Jerry. And he's surprised because Kendall is okay with that as well. He just laughs it off, asking Roman, who are you going to fire next? Roman, though, is second-guessing his decision, but Kendall rewords it as genius. He tells Roman that this is what their dad would do, and even spins it in a way where it makes these two guys look like the two brilliant minds to turn things around at Waystar. Now, while those two were deciding to restructure the company, Shiv was at a party where she ran into Tom. They did that weird thing where they start insulting each other, but there's still a lot of sexual chemistry between the two, and they end up spending the majority of the night together. She does reveal to Tom that she's not sure what to do regarding the whole Matsson situation. But through the course of the conversation, Tom reveals to Shiv that he wants her back. And she goes, well, then you never should have betrayed me. This gives Tom an opening to kind of explain himself. And he tells Shiv that long before he met her, he was always obsessed a little bit with money, earning it, keeping it, buying fancy things, all that. And then he met Shiv. It always felt like he was going to be caught between Shiv and Logan Roy. He decided to go with his career because Logan basically just paid more. He chose money over love. He then throws it back at her saying, you would have done the same thing. And she knows she would have, so they actually have a good laugh about it. The next day is the day of the big investor presentation. Matsson knows what Kendall's going to talk about, so he makes one last pitch, FaceTiming Shiv to say, is there any way you can stop this? And she says, no. She then goes to the building where they're having the presentation, and Kendall's a little upset because that whole plan of having a house didn't really work out as he had thought. The bigger concern, though, is in the seats because Roman is reading the pitch that Kendall's going to make, and it's just full of these projections that have seemed to come out of thin air. I mean, yeah, they sound really good, but the concern is there any actual credible backing with this? Or did you just pull this out of your ass? And Kendall jokes about it, but in reality, he really pressured some analysts to fudge some numbers and rework some projections and speak as if the 5% is the 95%. Shiv is so concerned that she tells Roman, you're out of control. Kendall's out of control. I mean, should we just pull the plug on this entire day? But Roman shakes his head saying, no, it's everything will be fine. This is a decent play. We're good. When it comes time to actually go on the stage, though,
Shiv's words have been ringing through Roman's ears for a few hours, and he actually does bring it to Kendall and says, maybe we shouldn't do this. I mean, maybe we should reschedule, rethink it. And Kendall actually gets upset at this because he thought up until this point that Roman was on board with his idea. But Roman, sensing that his fragile brother is upset, says, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just worried that I can't sell it. He doesn't want to risk sending Kendall up to stage with a frazzled mind, so he assures Kendall to continue the pitch just like he wanted to. But as Kendall is making his way to the stage, Carl stops him because Carl also got a look at the pitch that Kendall's going to make, and he's not happy. Carl is the CFO, so all these projections and all these numbers that Kendall's going to throw out there, ultimately, it's going to make Carl look bad if they're not real. He starts off by warning Kendall to not do this, but when Kendall doesn't really pay attention to him, Carl gets tough with him, saying, look, I had a good relationship with your dad because we've been through some stuff, but I don't have a relationship with you. So if you try to do this, if you try to just make stuff up on the stage, I'll talk. And if you want to sit here and fire me, I mean, how's that going to look? You're firing your CFO a week after your dad died? Yeah, good luck with that. You'll be toast. You have a knife at my throat, but I also have a knife at your throat too. Kendall then starts to walk away, and Carl tells him, good luck, bud. And the speech starts off pretty rough. There's no denying it. It gets weird when a video of Logan pops up, and it's made to look like Logan is talking to Kendall in real time. Yeah, that was bizarre. But slowly the speech gets a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better. And Kendall's pitch on Living Plus isn't all that bad. In the middle of it, Shiv, who is watching from another room, gets a phone call from Matsson, and Matsson's pissed off. He once again asks Shiv if she can stop it, and she says, oh, no, what? You don't like this? You don't want to make prison camps for grannies? Matsson asks, all right, well, what's the game with all this? And Shiv says, yeah, he might be riding a bullshit unicycle, but maybe someone could put a stick in the spokes. So Matsson decides to do that. He tweets out Doderick Mock Fry. And Doderick is one of Waystar's mascots. Mock Fry, well, that's a reference to Nazi Germany. It's not a good look because the guy that's reportedly going to buy the company is referring to the latest thing that the company's pitching as a concentration camp. Kendall's actually asked about it by a journalist at the event, and he doesn't really know how to respond to it, but he does so, pointing out that Matsson just comes from a different culture and trying to brush it aside as quickly as possible. When Shiv finds out about it, she calls Matsson up and says, hey, maybe you're giving this too much attention than it deserves, so you might want to back off, and Matsson does end up deleting the tweet. Screenshots, though, they live forever. When Kendall comes back to the green room, he is welcomed back with claps, applause. He did a really good job. And Living Plus is getting good reaction on social media. All in all, it was a win for Kendall and the group, especially considering he didn't get into those ridiculous projections. In episode 7, it's the eve of the election night. Shiv, along with Tom, are going to be hosting their dad's old party. He had it every year for election night, and with him gone, it's not stopping. Shiv and Tom have been getting along really well lately, so much so that they had sexual intercourse. That's right. Tom rocked Shiv's world. Shiv rocked Tom's world. It was hot. It was steamy. Endorphins are real high right now. But Shiv's not just in a good mood because she had sex. No, she's also in a good mood because Jimenez is up by 4 in the recent polls. Jimenez is Jared Mankin's main competition. Believe it or not, yeah, it's not Connor Roy. Shiv absolutely despises Mencken, so finding out the day before the election that he's trailing is really, really good news. It's only good news, though, for Shiv. It's certainly not good news for ATN, who have kind of hitched their wagon to Jared Mencken. Tom, though, has to head off to ATN. They're firing a bunch of people that day, while Shiv has to head off to have lunch with her brothers. Before Ken heads to this lunch, he meets with Rava. Their daughter Sophie doesn't want to go to school. She's freaked out about the election. The past weekend, somebody with a Ravenhead shirt passed by her on the street and made a racist comment. And if you're wondering who Ravenhead is, he's the former ATN anchor who really sympathized heavily with Hitler. Believe it or not, a scumbag like that has supporters, and it's been freaking out Sophie so much so that she no longer wants to go to school because she's worried about what would happen if Mencken wins. Rava's not quite sure what to do, so she thought that maybe Ken could call Sophie, reassure that everything will be okay,
but it ends like most conversations between two divorced people do, a screaming match on the street. Ken then heads off to this lunch, and he's the last one to arrive. Roman was the second last one to arrive. He's been doing his due diligence to try to get some dirt on Matsson, anything that they can use that might sully his reputation and tarnish the deal. He's having his people dig under every nook and cranny. But when he gets to the table, the deal is off limits. They're actually discussing their father's funeral. Connor's there because he's been kind of the head of everything, and he wants to know if anybody wants to speak at it, kind of take the lead. Nobody really jumps at the opportunity, but they agree to reconvene and talk about it later in the day. After Connor leaves because he has a very important conversation with his campaign leaders, Ken and Roman want to run something by Shiv. They want to invite Nate to the party that night. Nate would be a contingency plan if they can't push Matsson on the deal. If they invite Nate and they pitch him on the fact that Matsson's a scumbag, the deal is bad, then maybe Nate could push the DOJ and regulatory so much so that they wouldn't have to worry about the price. It does make Shiv a little bit uncomfortable, and she does consider Tom, but ultimately she gives in and tells both Roman and Ken, yeah, it's fine. But as soon as they leave the table, Shiv calls up Matsson and says, you have to show up at this party. They're gunning for you. They're trying to get regulatory on you, so you need to show your face and kind of show everybody in the room that you are a stand-up guy. Little do her brothers know, Shiv is working against them on this. Later that night, Shiv heads back to the apartment and they get ready to host this party. She does have to let Tom know who will be in attendance, i.e. Nate, just so he's not taken aback. And he feels uncomfortable, but there's nothing he can do. A little while later, everybody shows up, and Shiv, Kendall, and Roman get together to formulate a plan on how they can work the room in their favor to make sure Matsson doesn't complete this deal. As they're doing this, Roman gets a phone call from Menken's campaign. They're worried. The polls are actually worse than what's being reported. And while they would love a full-court press from ATN, what they really want is Connor to drop out of the race. It's pretty amazing, but Connor's 1% is possibly the difference maker in this. And Menken's campaign figures that if Connor drops out of the race, that 1% goes to him. It's a lot of votes. So they want Roman to smooth over a deal. Now, initially, Roman poses it to Connor and he shoots it down, but Roman starts negotiating with Connor along with his vice president on a possible ambassador role. They start throwing countries around. They start really negotiating this thing. And the offer is Oman. It's, as Connor puts it, the poor man's Saudi Arabia. It's of interest to him. So he agrees to think about it and get back to Roman. When Roman walks out, he's surprised because he sees Jerry has shown up. He's a little bit relieved, and he tells Frank, great, I guess you smoothed things over. Frank says, oh, no. She's extremely pissed off. So Roman has that on his to-do list. Try to make things good with Jerry, but he's going to do it later in the party. Now, even though Shiv and Tom are hosting it, Kendall still gets up and welcomes everybody to the party. He addressed the elephant in the room, that Logan isn't there with them, and it's sad. And he asks for a moment of silence. But in that moment of silence, it gets interrupted when Matsson and his entire crew, i.e. his number 2, Oscar, and his communications director, Ebba. This comes as a really big surprise to Kendall, but he plays it off like he knew all along that Matsson was coming. But when he finishes the speech, he gets Roman and Shiv together to ask what the hell's going on. And Shiv plays it perfectly, acting like she has no idea either. They consider just throwing him out of the party, but Ken says, no, you know what, we can do this. All we have to do is keep him away from the big wigs. They stupidly tell Shiv to be on his hip and make sure that he doesn't talk to anybody of value. While she does that, Roman and Kendall will go around and kind of stab him in the back, make him seem like the Antichrist. Inside, though, Matsson has already started doing some due diligence. He goes and talks to Tom about what exactly his role is at ATN, what he's best suited for, and Tom completely fails the test because he's a kiss-ass and Matsson sees right through it. Shiv does walk over, interrupting the conversation, but when it's just Matsson and Shiv, she tells Matsson exactly who he needs to talk to. The first person they go and talk to is Nate. And Nate and Matsson's conversation goes over great. Nate's big concern is ATN, the leadership over there, the fact that it has been so Mencken heavy. And right in front of Shiv, Matsson assures Nate that if he were to take over the company, there would be major changes. And everybody knows that it's Tom that he's talking about. And Shiv doesn't say a word. She just goes along with it. Right after Nate talks to Matsson, though, he does run into Ken. And Ken makes his pitch to Nate. He tells him that this deal isn't good, that Matsson is shady. And he makes Nate an offer, saying that if Nate were to get tough on regulations, then the first 100 days in office would be pretty favorable for him and his group. Nate can smell the desperation, but he does tell Ken, I'll check in and let you know. While Nate was getting schmoozed over by Ken, Shiv took Matsson into the coat rack to congratulate him on doing a tremendous job so far on getting around the room and making a good impression. She finally does address, though, what's in it for her. She says, look, I like helping you out and ushering in this new era for the company, but I'm going to need some guarantees on this. And what Shiv wants is a really big role if Matsson were to take over. Matsson agrees to think about it, but it does seem to be a positive conversation. They leave the coat room. Shiv meets up with Tom. It's even more uncomfortableness for Tom because people are walking up to him, bringing up the fact that after the election, they're hearing he's going to be out of ATN. And Shiv just continues to laugh it off. And Tom, well, this is the first he's hearing it. So it hasn't been a real fun party for Tom. It's getting to be, though, a more fun party for Matsson. Now, with all of the schmoozing out of the way, he gets to enjoy himself. So him, Oscar, Ebba, they just sit down and chill. But then Greg comes over. Greg was told to go over and distract Matsson by Ken. And at first, it's a little awkward because Oscar, he's a dick to Greg. But when Matsson brings up that he wants to fire Ebba, but he can't, Greg uses that as a way to kind of get in good with Matsson, and he says, I'll do it. Yeah, I just fired a bunch of people today. I have a lot of experience in this. But Ebba doesn't really find the joke funny, and she storms out of there. It's something that Kendall noticed. He feels like this could be an opening. And that's because Roman's private investigator did get some information on Matsson. He found out some details on the relationship between Matsson and Ebba. And while he doesn't know everything, he knows enough that it's weird. So when Kendall sees Ebba walk out for a cigarette, he grabs Roman and they go to kind of sweet talk her a little bit. And while they don't find out all the details on the weirdness of Ebba and Matsson's relationship, what they do find out is that Matsson's numbers are skewed. He's reporting this massive subscribership, but it turns out his numbers in India are way inflated. This is really exciting to both Kendall and Roman, and they rush to tell Shiv that Matsson is full of it. As soon as Shiv, though, gets a minute, she rushes over to grab Matsson and has a private conversation with him, asking, what the hell's going on in India? Apparently your numbers are inflated. And Matsson admits, yeah, there was a little bit of a clerical error. It turns out that the numbers, well, it's as if there were two Indias. Shiv asks him, what exactly do you plan on doing about this to fix this error? Because you're offering a 50% stock, and if this comes out, that 50% isn't going to be worth nearly as much as it was. But Matsson's fix on this is to buy Waystar. He feels like if he purchases Waystar, then the negative press revolving Gojo's inflated numbers go away. They're just kind of brushed under the table. That is a terrible plan, and Shiv knows it. She also knows that she might be screwed because she hitched her wagon to Matsson, who might just be nothing more than a con man. And speaking of the con man, he's decided that he is staying in the election, although he hasn't told Roman yet. Roman figured that he finally had to face Jerry. And he apologizes and acts like the firing was fake, but Jerry didn't take it like that. She looks at Roman and says, I'm out, and I've also hired litigation. I want an astronomical sum of money from you, and if I don't get it, then all of those pictures that you sent me, they're going public. Yeah, Jerry ain't playing games. This has Roman a little bit on edge, so he walks over to Connor to finally get an answer, and it's not the answer he wanted. He starts taking his frustration out on Willa, because he blames Willa. Willa was, after all, kind of the one that convinced Connor to stay in the race. But all the insults that Roman is throwing their way isn't going to change Willa or more importantly, Connor's mind. He's staying in the race. While Roman was getting this answer from Connor, Kendall was saying goodbye to Nate. Nate had to leave early. There was a couple of people he was with who kind of have a big mouth, and they didn't like the visual of Nate cozying up with Kendall so much. So just to avoid questions at work, Nate decided it was best if he bailed. Kendall, though, wants reassurance that his offer is good, but Nate doesn't really give it to him. When Nate leaves, it doesn't really sound like Ken has his plan B. He then overhears the commotion between Connor and his brother, and he goes over to kind of get in the way of it. But that's when he sees that Matsson was sitting over the shoulder of Connor. They start a little bit of a pissing contest. It's weird. It's not screaming, it's not contentious, but the tone is weird. And it also formulates a bit of a crowd. It's a show that these two put on, and at the end of it, they hug about how much they like the deal, even though they know that that's not true. Once they kind of split up, Tom walks up to Shiv and says, "Yeah, I'm going to bed. I don't want to be here anymore. It seems like everybody at this party knows that I'm getting fired from ATN, except me. Yeah, I'm not doing this." They decide to take the conversation outside to the balcony, and they're both really stressed out. Tom feeling like his days are numbered at ATN, and when he woke up today, he didn't think that was the case. And Shiv feeling like her days are numbered because she hitched her wagon to Matsson, who looks to be a fraud. But their conversation gets really personal and really aggressive really quickly. Things are said that they probably are going to regret later. It quickly dives into their own relationship, the motives for getting married. Tom gets really personal when he says that Shiv is not fit to be a mother, and he has no idea that Shiv is actually pregnant. And that really hurts Shiv to hear Tom say that because Tom wanted to have a baby with her for so many years. Shiv blames Tom for being such a snake and kissing up to Logan, which probably cost her months with her own dad because they were fighting at the time. Even though these two woke up with really good vibes in the morning, it ends with them just going their separate ways, Tom announcing to everybody that he's going to bed, and Kendall, Roman, and Shiv saying, "Yeah, screw that guy." Right before everybody leaves, though, Ken pulls Frank into the coat room and he says, "Hey, Matsson's numbers, they're fake. I can't recommend the board go through with this deal. If you dive into him, he is an absolute fraud. So what I think we should do is we should completely go reverse Viking on him. We should buy Gojo. If his numbers are fake and it gets out, his evaluation is going to tank, and we just bring them on board." Frank asks, what does this mean for Roman and Shiv? And Kendall admits he loves them, but he's not in love with them. This would kind of have to be a one head, one crown kind of thing. And he would be the one wearing that crown. He asks Frank if he's with him, and that's a question that we don't see the answer to. In episode 8, it is finally election night, and it means it's a big night for Tom. He's really stressed out because if he doesn't deliver good numbers, he feels like he's going to be ousted from the role of the head of ATN. To say Tom is on edge is an understatement. Greg, on the other hand, he's not on edge. He's just a little traumatized. He had a wild night with Matsson and his team. I mean, they got into some stuff. But with that wild night, he did learn that there might be something going on with Shiv and Matsson. He talks to Tom about it, and Tom tells him that information like that is like a fine wine. You just get it, store it away, and pop it out for a really big occasion. They're discussing this in a meeting, though, after the early exit polls. It's 5 p.m., and everything is pointing to Jimenez narrowly eking out Jared Mencken. This is going to be great news for Shiv and for Matsson's deal. Shiv is a big fan of Jimenez just for the fact that she can't stand Jared Mencken. She thinks the country will fall apart if he's the president, but also she knows that it'll solidify the deal with Matsson. So her and Matsson, they need Jimenez to win. She calls up Nate to see how the Jimenez camp is handling things, and Nate tells her that he's confident, but he would like if ATN covered some of the nasty things going on, such as voter intimidation, things of that sort. So far, ATN hasn't said a word about it. Unfortunately for Nate, they always had a rule at ATN under Logan that Logan wouldn't get involved in an election night. They would kind of sit in the office and they would be viewers, just like everybody else. So that's what the kids are doing. They're in the office, they're present, but they're not getting involved like that.
That doesn't mean they're not getting involved in the election. This is bad news for Roman if Jimenez wins. Because if Mencken were to win, he would kill the Gojo deal. But it would also mean that ATN wouldn't have a direct in with the Oval Office. But now it's looking like he's not going to win. He does want to meet with Roman face to face, so Roman heads out. And as soon as he leaves, Ken gets a phone call from Rava. She's a little freaked out. It looks like a car is following them. And Ken says, "Oh, no, that was just me. I wanted to put some security on you guys, but I didn't want to bother you with it." And Rava, along with their daughter, are really stressed out about election night because they're scared of what's going to happen to them if Mencken were to win. So it's giving Ken a little bit of pause. Maybe Mencken losing wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. He did have a good conversation with Nate, or at least he thought he did, so he decides to call him up. And through talking to Nate, he's able to get Jimenez on the phone and kind of touch base, let him know he's thinking of him, and wish him well. Ken is just preparing for life without Jared Mencken in office. And the truth is, so is Jared Mencken. The whole meeting that he wanted to have with Roman was to kind of spin the narrative, make a loss look like a win. He's still confident that they can win, but he's also preparing as if they lose, and Roman can help with that. After all, they are projected to get more votes than anyone thought they would. A couple of hours later, some of the states start calling it. One of them is Kentucky. That's a state that actually Connor Roy thought he could win. And when it goes for Mencken, he realizes that he is not going to win this election. He now knows that he's going to have to concede the election, which is tough, but he thinks maybe he could salvage that deal with Mencken. He's having trouble, though, getting anyone to take him seriously, i.e. Tom or Roman for that matter, on the phone. So he's going to have to head into ATN's office. Now, maybe one of the reasons why Tom isn't taking Connor seriously was the fact that he's trying to run this news network. And there's a lot going on. The touchscreen isn't working, and on top of it, he's got the kids calling him up, wondering why they're not covering these fires in Wisconsin. Specifically, Shiv and Kendall. These fires were at a voting center, and it looks like it was done by Jared Mencken's people. Tom tries to defend his actions by not covering it, but something like this seems like a pretty big deal. At this point, it looks like Ken has completely come over to the Jimenez side, because Roman's the only one fighting this. He doesn't think that they should cover it. He thinks that it's nothing more than crisis actors, false flags, all that stuff. But eventually, ATN does cover the fires at the polls. Once they do report on it, Roman gets a phone call from Mencken's campaign team. They need Roman's help on spinning this narrative. Because for them, Wisconsin is a win right now. That fire took place in a predominantly Democratic area. Right now, Jared Mencken has won that state without those votes. So as long as they don't count those votes, Mencken would run away with it. This is kind of an unprecedented situation, so nobody knows what to do. But Roman, he jumps into action and trying to get ATN to work the narrative that Mencken is the winner. He does so by sending Ravenhead some bullet points that Ravenhead can go off of, because Roman knows that Ravenhead is going to get plenty of airtime. This is even behind Tom's back, who gets called into a private conversation with Shiv. She felt like she was a little too hard on Tom the other night and she wants to apologize, but Tom is kind of over it. He doesn't feel like he should apologize for anything, and the two get into it a little bit. Tom even blames Shiv for killing her father, kind of, and finally Shiv has enough and says, "Well, you know what, I'm pregnant. It's yours. It's never an easy time to tell you this, but yep, I'm pregnant." But she gets really, really hurt when Tom questions whether that's true or not, or whether it's simply a tactic that she's using in this argument. She actually walks out of the office, goes and finds her brother and says, "Yeah, I'm just going to tell you right now, Tom, you can't trust him." So it seems like Tom's bed has been made, that after the election, he's going to be out. Fast forward to 11 p.m., and there's still no real clear word on what to do with these Milwaukee votes. Shiv's found out that under state law, they can't certify it. These were votes that weren't cast. But then Roman flies into the office and says, Mencken's team is calling it. They have the votes, so we should call it. It sparks a pretty big debate in the room whether or not ATN should call the state of Wisconsin for Jared Mencken or not. They get their voting expert to come in, and he says, yes, as of right now, if we were to call it, Mencken would be the winner because the votes that have been cast are for Mencken. But those votes that got burnt up, it would likely go to Jimenez. I mean, Yeah, we don't know for 100% certainty, but we do know based on voter history. That's a real big Democratic area. So it would be too close to call. It basically turns into a battle between Roman and Shiv, with Roman wanting to call Wisconsin, knowing how important that state would be for Mencken, and Shiv not wanting to because, she hates him. That's when they all get distracted, though, by Ravenhead and his bullet points from Roman. Shiv especially gets so annoyed. She knows where this is coming from, and she confronts Roman about it, telling him that what he just did was bullshit. She then gets a phone call from Lucas Matson, who wants to know what the hell's going on, because it looks like things have taken a turn in the last few hours, and Shiv reassures him that everything will be okay. Although she has no idea whether it'll be okay or not. Matson mentions how Greg had said it was getting a little dicey in the room, and that's when Shiv realizes that Matson has been talking to Greg. She didn't realize this, so she pulls Greg aside, telling him, if you screw me on this, I will gut you. Greg tries to ask what's in it for him to keep his silence, but Shiv doesn't offer anything, just telling him his well-being is in it for him. Upstairs, though, Roman gets word from Mencken's campaign team that if they were to win, 100% they would kill the Gojo deal. He relays this to Kendall. He then rushes to go find Tom and tell Tom to tell the news team that Wisconsin is for Mencken. There is some pushback on this from Darwin, their voting expert. He doesn't want to do this because if it comes out later on that those votes that burnt up went for Jimenez and Jimenez actually won the state, it's a really bad look. And it's also a legal thing too. We're talking possible sanctions, federal court, that sort of thing. They end up coming to an agreement that they would call it for Mencken, but there would be a graphic that would air that says pending. One of the reasons why Roman is pushing so hard for this, knowing full well that maybe it blows up later, is the fact that if they do end up calling Wisconsin for Mencken, Mencken can use it in court. That a reputable news source like ATN called it for him. It doesn't matter that the votes actually weren't cast, and it doesn't matter that he didn't win. It's the fact that ATN called it for him, and he can use it as ammunition. So that's why Roman really, really wants them to push for this. With the agreement that they would use a graphic, Darwin seems to be in. Then, though, he gets wasabi in his eye and he can't go on camera. Since he can't go on camera, Roman pushes Tom to push the news team that Wisconsin is gone for Mencken, no disclaimer. Right before they call Wisconsin for Mencken, Connor shows up in person. He asks Roman to call up Mencken's team and ask if a possible spot were to still be open for him. This were to be if Connor concedes the election and says that Mencken were to be the winner. And to Roman's surprise, yeah, there is a spot. The ambassador to Slovenia. It's good enough for Connor. So, a little while after Wisconsin goes for Mencken, he gets up and tells all of his con heads that he's getting word that Jared Mencken will be the next president. Once again, more ammunition that Mencken can use. A little while later, Darwin gets word that Arizona is going to go for Mencken. If this were to be the case, then that would mean Mencken were to win the election. Now, normally they would just go and they'd report it. But this is per ATN. No other news source is going to report that Jared Mencken were to be president. ATN would have to, though, because they've already declared that Wisconsin were to go for Mencken. And that gives Darwin a little bit of pause. He doesn't want to rush this thing. Roman, however, certainly does. Kendall asks for a minute alone with Roman, and he starts discussing this. He's had a lot of second thoughts about going with Jared Mencken's team. He doesn't want to do it. He knows that Mencken's a scumbag. And he's been doing a lot of soul searching since talking to Rava. Roman, however, makes a really good pitch that they're going to have a guy in the White House that will answer their calls. Kendall, though, still doesn't know what to do, and he goes and talks to Shiv. He admits to Shiv that part of his hesitation of putting Mencken in the office is the fact that he's kind of jealous of Roman and Mencken's relationship. The fact that Mencken never wants to meet with him, it's only Roman. But then there's also the other stuff. And Shiv begs him not to make this announcement. He then asks her, can you go and talk to Nate? Find out if Jimenez's campaign can give us something in reassurance that they will kill the Gojo deal. This puts Shiv in a little bit of a bind, but she fakes it. She goes into another room that Kendall can see, and she pretends to make a phone call. And when she comes out of it, she tells both Roman and Kendall that, yeah, she feels like there's something there. She, however, is really sketchy about it and doesn't give nearly the assurances that Kendall is giving per Mencken's team. Because it's still up in the air, Kendall says, you know what, I'll call Nate. And even though Shiv tries to stop him, Kendall does it anyway. And what he finds is the fact that his sister had lied to him. He then sees Greg and he walks over to him and says, hey, do you know anything that's going on? And because of the fact that Shiv refused to make assurances to Greg, Greg rats her out and says, oh yeah, I know what's going on. Your sister is in bed with Lucas Matson, figuratively, not literally. This turns everything on a dime. When Kendall walks back in, he tells Roman and the entire room that Shiv has been lying to them, and that Shiv is really wanting to go with Lucas Matson. She wants to push the Gojo deal, not kill it. Shiv tries to backpedal like crazy, tries to plead her case, but it's done. Because of this revelation, Kendall is back on Team Mencken. She's outnumbered 2-1, and they inform Tom to call the election for Mencken. Mencken is able to get up in front of his campaign team and declare victory. Now, if there is a battle in court, he'll at least have that. Darwin does want to go on camera and talk about the caveats to Mencken winning, but Tom doesn't allow it. And on other news organizations, Tom is getting scorched because they feel like Tom rushed this announcement because ATN is, after all, in bed with Mencken and his team. As she walks out of ATN's office, Shiv calls up Matson and tells him that the next day they're going to drop Matson's fudgy numbers and she'll have some talking points on how to walk it back. It's basically just a news dump. But she does vow to screw both of her brothers over on this, that the deal will still go through and she'll make sure of it. In episode 9, it is the day of Logan's funeral, but nationally, it's also a huge news day. ATN is under scrutiny for what they did. A lot of people are really pissed off that ATN was the first one to announce Jared Mencken was president because the votes haven't been counted. The situation in Wisconsin is huge. So Mencken is only president to the ATN crowd. Nationally, it's up for grabs still. There's likely to be deep litigation regarding who actually becomes president. It's a hot button issue, and it's one that's leading to a lot of protests and a few riots around the street. But people like Matson have to prepare for the likelihood that Jared Mencken becomes president. So he calls up Shiv before she heads off to the church. He wants to know what she's thinking. And she tells him, this is the perfect day to drop your situation regarding the faulty numbers. It's a news dump. Everyone's focused on the election. No one will be concerned with the fact that you were lying about your subscribers. Matson's going to get Ebba to drop these numbers, but he's also concerned with what happens with Jared Mencken. If Mencken blocks the deal, it's all for nothing. And Shiv doesn't seem all that concerned. She, though, is getting prepared for her father's funeral. And she, along with Roman and Kendall, are all going to be heading over together. Kendall's the last one, though, to get in the car. On his way over to meet his brother and sister, he got a phone call from Rava. She was supposed to go to the funeral along with their children, but she's going upstate. She no longer feels safe. When Kendall hears this, he gets so incensed that he makes a beeline over to where Rava is located and demands that she bring the kids to their grandfather's funeral. But Rava's steadfast that she's just not going to do it. Sophie doesn't even want to go. She doesn't feel safe, and they don't want to be put in a situation where something could happen. It doesn't help the fact that Kendall is going through a lot. Emotionally, he's pretty frazzled. The dude is just on edge. So when he finally does meet up with Roman and Shiv, he's kind of going through it a little bit. Shiv can tell, and she asks Kendall what's wrong, and he explains that Rava isn't bringing the kids to the funeral, and everybody in the car thinks that's pretty messed up. There's a little lull in the conversation, so this is the time where Shiv decides to tell her brothers that she's pregnant. It comes as a pretty big surprise to both of them, but she felt like she had to tell them because their mother is going to be at the funeral, and she's going to tell her, so she might as well tell her brothers. A couple minutes later, they arrive at the church, and the first thing that Kendall does when he gets out is grab his assistant and tell her, hey, I want to meet with family lawyers. I want custody. He starts looking on his calendar, and he sees a meeting that was scheduled by Jess with Jess, and he doesn't remember putting that on there. Of course, it was put on by her. So he says, what's up with this? And she doesn't want to discuss it that day because it's the day of his dad's funeral, but he kind of forces her to, and she says, look, you've always been really supportive of me, and I do appreciate that, but I think it's time I move on.
I just need more. And at first, he is supportive. He says, yeah, that's totally understandable. But he does ask if it's about Mencken, and she says she's been thinking about it for quite some time. And then all of a sudden, he turns. He calls her stupid. He calls all of it stupid. He says that she's making a horrible mistake, and he makes a beeline for the church. Before he actually enters, though, Hugo grabs him to let him know about the Gojo story that dropped regarding the faulty subscriber numbers. He just wants to keep Kendall up to date. He then heads into the church that is packed with a bunch of big names. Jared Mencken is making an appearance. So is Lucas Matson. And then everybody from Waystar. So the Carls, the Jerrys, the Franks. And then in the front row, you have the women of Logan Roy. You've got the kid's mom. You've got the woman who he cheated on her with. Then you've got Marcia, and then Carrie right next to her. Now, normally, Carrie would be shunned out by Marcia, just like she was when Logan first passed away. But Marcia's actually pretty nice to her. She consoles her because she can tell that Carrie is going through a lot. She's not really dealing with it well. The kids have a little bit of time before the casket actually shows up, and they all kind of go into business mode. Roman asks Kendall, who have you talked to? Because I think we still need to get the board wrapped around our ideas. And Kendall hasn't talked to anybody. Roman, though, decides to. He walks up to Frank because he wants to make a play for this thing. He tells Frank that Kendall is kind of emotionally out of it. Mencken will block the deal, and he kind of needs to get a team together. But he can tell by Frank's face that that team will not include Frank. He walks back over to the area where Shiv and Kendall are because their mom has shown up. And right away, their mom can tell that Shiv is pregnant. It's like a sixth sense. Shiv, though, excuses herself when she notices that Matsson's shown up. She asks how the story is being perceived, and so far they haven't gotten any blowback. It's just like Shiv predicted. She then pulls Matsson aside and suggests an idea on how to get around this whole Mencken situation. If he's going to get hung up on regulatory, Shiv suggests that Matsson have a U.S. CEO. That way, there is no regulatory issue. It's not a foreigner taking over a U.S. media company. It's run by an American citizen. And she suggests that that American citizen be her. Matsson certainly seems to be on board with the idea, but they don't really have time to discuss it more because the casket arrives. The funeral kicks off, and when it comes time to do some speeches, the first guy to get up there is Logan's brother, Greg's grandfather. And Greg was told to not allow him to speak, but there's no way that this guy wasn't speaking at his brother's funeral. What the kids were worried about was Ewan was going to say something that might be a little controversial, might tank the stock price. And at first, that doesn't seem to be the issue. Ewan tells a nice story about when they were kids coming over to the country. But then he gets into the whole, hey, my brother was a piece of crap. And it gets a little awkward. Next up to speak is Roman. And Roman had been practicing this. He thought this would be his big moment, but he chokes. I mean, he gets up there and he cannot do it. He starts bawling his eyes out to his brother and sister that he just can't. He has to sit down, and it puts Kendall in an uncomfortable position because Kendall wasn't planning on speaking, but he's thrust into the spotlight. And he actually shines. He does a great job. The final speaker is Shiv, and she really doesn't know what to say. She also wasn't planning on speaking, but when Roman kind of crapped the bed, it forced her to get up there. And it's uncomfortable because you have to say nice things about a guy that wasn't all that nice. But she perseveres, she gets through it, and everybody then starts making their way out of the church. As they're doing so, Kendall is there to thank everybody for coming. And when Mencken walks by, he tells Kendall, you did a great job, and they agree to talk later. Hugo then walks up because he's learned that Shiv has floated to Matsson the idea of a U.S. CEO. And that would screw up their whole plan. Everyone heads over to the mausoleum where they're going to be putting Logan Roy. But as they're walking back to their cars after the ceremony, Kendall grabs Hugo and explains to him that he wants Hugo to tell the press that the family is souring on the idea of Matsson taking over. He wants Hugo to make it sound like Matsson is trying to steal the company for a song
and the board is also questioning it. He then admits to Hugo that this is an explicit plan to mess up the deal, with him ending up on top and no one else, just him alone. He wants Hugo to come with him, and he invites him, and he does say, "This won't be me and you. You will be my bitch, but you will be paid handsomely. We're talking millions of dollars." And Hugo is on board with that idea. Everybody then heads to the St. Regis, because what is a funeral without a hit after party? Now, with Hugo in his pocket, he goes after his dad's old security guard, Colin. He tells him that he wants him to work for him, and Colin seems to be on board. Kendall then notices that Mencken has shown up at this after party, and he finally has a chance to talk to him. He congratulates him on what he feels like will be a formality, Mencken ending up in the presidency. But he does ask, when are you going to make an official comment on regulations? We're kind of waiting for that. And Mencken doesn't exactly give Kendall a vote of confidence when he says, well, I'm going to do my best. Because according to Roman, this was a done deal. It wasn't Mencken doing his best. It was Mencken getting it done. So this is a little troubling. He doesn't have time to discuss it further, though, because the conversation gets interrupted by Cousin Greg, who comes over, introduced himself to Mencken as one of the guys from ATN who made it all possible, while also talking up Tom as well, who is busy back at the ATN office. Next thing you know, Roman comes over, and then finally, Connor comes over. Mencken is ironically saved by Shiv, who comes over and grabs him and says, hey, let's go talk to Lucas Matson. She brings him over, and Matson and Shiv are able to make their pitch to Mencken. And it's no secret that Shiv doesn't really like Mencken, but as she tells both men, our viewers like Jared Mencken, and I respect the opinion of our viewers. Now, whether or not Mencken will accept the idea of a US-based CEO in the Gojo acquisition, that is still a big question. A couple hours later, though, Mencken leaves, Matson leaves, but Tom finally shows up. He got 20 minutes away from the offices at ATN to make an appearance. He makes a beeline for Shiv, and he starts questioning why it took her so long to reveal to him that she was pregnant. And she tells him that she couldn't really find a good time to do it. They start kind of getting into their normal Tom and Shiv banter, but then Tom kind of breaks down. Not as aggressively as Roman did earlier, but he feels guilty. He was really close to Logan, and he didn't make an appearance at the funeral because he was just too busy at ATN. And he feels bad about it. And Shiv can tell that Tom's kind of going through it as well. She tells him, go back to our apartment. Get some sleep. Get some rest. Shiv's cell phone then rings, and it's Matson, because he's gotten word that Mencken would be open to a US-based CEO. And this is great news for Team Shiv and Team Matson. So Shiv is over in the corner smiling ear to ear. Her brothers, meanwhile, are in another corner planning against her. Kendall walks over to Roman and says, look, man, I'm hearing that Mencken might be open to allowing Matson's deal to go through if there's a US-based CEO. Roman is floored by this. He doesn't think that's remotely possible. He thinks that they have Mencken by the balls, but Kendall says, we don't, man. We don't have him by the balls. He has us by the balls. And it was you who screwed this whole thing up. And I don't blame you. I blame myself because I should have seen it coming and I should have put a stop to it. But you screwed this thing up and now we have to clean it up. If we don't want to lose Waystar, we're going to have to get real and fight Shiv with the board. Kendall then pats Roman on the head and tells him, I've got a plan. You screwed it up, but it'll be all right. But hearing that he's the one who might have screwed up this whole thing, the day that they said goodbye to their dad, is just too much for Roman. He needs to let out some aggression. So he walks out of that hotel and walks into the streets where people are protesting. But instead of joining them, he starts cursing them out. I mean, it's one versus a mob. And it doesn't take too long before Roman Roy ends up on the ground in the fetal position, because cursing out a mob and telling them that they're idiots is a really good way to get punched in the face. And in the series finale, it is the day before the big board vote, and Kendall Roy is a little nervous. Right now, he doesn't have the votes, and the latest news that he gets
is that Stewie might be waffling. Now, it doesn't mean that Kendall's still not confident he can salvage this thing, but it's not looking great. And not too far down the street, you've got his sister Shiv basically celebrating with Matsson over the fact that they do have the votes. And it's just a formality before they own Waystar. Shiv, though, is doing a whole lot of talking. A lot of it is stuff that Matsson just doesn't really care about. Quite simply, there's just a lot of nervous energy in the room with Shiv, and it's starting to sink in that she will finally be CEO of her dad's company. Matsson does ask her what she thinks about Tom regarding ATN, and she's brutally honest. She says that he's good for the role, and she's okay with it if he wants to keep him on. Her phone then buzzes, though, and she has to walk away to take the phone call, and it's her mother. It's because Roman has shown up at her house. And neither Shiv nor Kendall knew exactly what happened to Roman, but their mother tells Shiv he's in a bit of a fragile state. You might want to come pick him up. And it's not like going down to the store or going down the block to go get him. They have to go to some tropical, nice-looking island, which is going to require a private jet. But Shiv's willing to do it because she feels like if she can sway Roman, then that'll just leave Kendall on an island by himself. So she brags to Matsson right before she leaves that she's going to unify this board right before the vote. And then she takes off to go meet up with her brother. Right before the plane ride does take off, she gets a phone call from a very nervous Tom. He's scheduled to meet with Matsson, and he's constantly been worried that his head is on the chopping block, so he wants to get Shiv's feeling on it. And she promises Tom that she's going to do everything in her power to keep him on, but ultimately it's going to be up to Matsson. She's just doing what she can at the moment. She does, though, want to have a serious talk about their relationship. They are, after all, having a baby together. And after joking around a little bit, she finally just says, "Are you ready to be in a serious relationship?" And Tom says, "Honest to God, I don't know." Not exactly the news Shiv wanted to hear, and she hangs up and tells the plane to take off. A couple hours later, she touches down and heads over to her mother's house, where there's Roman, a little bit beat up, and he's telling a lie that he ended up winning the fight, which he clearly didn't. But all in all, he looks fine. He just looks like he wanted to get away. Shiv, though, isn't the only one that's coming. While Kendall was trying to get in touch with Stewie, Hugo walked in because he had gotten a beat on where Roman was. Now, one of the reasons why Shiv and mainly Kendall want to touch base with Roman is because they don't know if he's coming to the board vote, and they're going to need to know which way he's voting on, especially Kendall. Kendall's counting on Roman's vote to be on his side, so he really needs Roman to come back. So he grabs another private jet and heads down, and while heading over, he finally gets in touch with Stewie, and Stewie reassures him, "I'm on your side." When he finally does get to his mother's place, there's Shiv, already with Roman, and she tells Kendall, "Back off, he's fragile." Even though Roman is saying, "I'm not fragile." Kendall doesn't even get pleasantries out of the way. He gets right into it. "The hell are you doing, Rome?" Kendall then looks at Shiv and asks her if she has anything to do with this, but he's coming off extremely desperate. And Roman just tells him, "Maybe I had a change of heart, and I just don't care what you have to think." As Kendall continues to berate Roman, Roman just gets tired of it, calls him a clown, and walks off. Their mother comes over to try to defuse the situation and invites all of them to stay for dinner, which, reluctantly, Kendall does. Shiv was already planning on eating. They do have some time to kill, though, and Kendall and Shiv have it out a bit. There's a big pissing contest between the two about who has which votes. But as Shiv points out, I'm still winning 7-6, so you can get whoever you want, but I'm still going to end up coming out on top. Kendall, though, does throw out that he is hearing Matsson is talking to Lawrence Yee from Volter. Shiv plays it off like she knew this, but in reality, she had no idea. This pissing contest does get interrupted when Roman finally decides to join the group. With both of her brothers there, she offers up some of the IP, saying that when she's in charge, she does want to keep them somewhat on board. But they take that as a slight. Roman equates it to their sister getting them a job at the mall. Shiv, though, was trying to give her brothers a lifeline, but she doesn't appreciate the fact that they're making her out to be the bad guy. The way she looks at it, they decided to take the crown and leave her out of it. So she decided to go behind their back and get the crown. But as all three kids have awkward conversation, back in New York, Tom is having his meeting with Matsson. And it doesn't go nearly like Tom had planned. The reason why Matsson wanted to meet with Tom wasn't to see if he wanted to let him go. It was to see whether or not Tom would be good to be CEO. Matsson admits to Tom that he's just been kind of souring on Shiv. He didn't really appreciate the way that she handled getting the numbers out for those fudgy subscribers. But one of the main things is Matsson wants to have sex with Shiv, and that could make things complicated. So instead of getting the woman who has a baby, he might as well get the guy who put the baby in her. He thinks that Tom would be best for the role because he's good, he's talented, and Mencken likes Tom a lot. So if things work out for Mencken being in Oval Office, it'll be good for ATN. Tom assures Matsson that he would be perfect for the job. But man, this is a lot for him to take in. He showed up at this meeting thinking that there was a chance he gets fired, and in the end, he's going to end up being the president and CEO of Waystar Royco. Matsson wants to celebrate, so he gets up to go get shots, and Greg scurries over and asks Tom, "So what's the deal, man? Are you getting fired?" And Tom doesn't tell him any of the news. He simply tells Greg that they're going to be all right. Tom, however, doesn't want to stick around for shots. He lets Greg do those. So Greg heads on over where Matsson and his team are celebrating, grabbing some shots, but they're all speaking in Swedish. And Greg is sick of listening to these people speak in Swedish and he not know what they're saying. So he opens up a translator. And he's able to figure out through their translation that Shiv is not going to be the CEO, that they're stabbing her in the back, and then it's going to be somebody else. At this news, Greg decides to try to use it to his favor. He calls up Kendall and interrupts him in the middle of dinner, and he tells him the news that Shiv is not going to be the CEO if this deal goes through. Kendall then calls around and gets word that, yeah, Matsson is interviewing a couple other CEOs. It's definitely not going to be Shiv. Kendall then runs into the room and grabs both Roman and Shiv and breaks the news. And her initial reaction is that it's bullshit. She doesn't believe it. But when she calls Matsson up, he doesn't answer, which she plays off like is normal, but in this situation, it's a little fishy. Kendall, realizing how this looks, tells her, "Go call Carolina. They've erased you from the new deal announcement draft." Shiv runs off to make that phone call, and Roman asks Kendall, "Is this a play?" And Kendall says, "No, this is real. Greg told me. It's rock solid." A few minutes later, they hear a scream, and it's Shiv confirming what her brother just told her. All three of them get emailed the latest draft, and sure enough, the name of the CEO is X'd out. Now, Shiv has to get her mind around the fact that she will not be CEO, but also the fact that she was being played. So even though about 10 minutes ago she was full team Matsson, she walks back and she wants to kill this guy. They need to figure out how they can salvage this thing for the family, so they call up Kendall's right-hand man, Tellus. Tellus, not realizing that Shiv is on the line, tells the group that it makes a lot of sense of what Matsson's doing, interviewing other CEOs. The fact is, Matsson doesn't need Shiv. The good news is, with Shiv now on board, they do have the votes. They could block this thing. But Tellus points out they're going to need a plan. I mean, they're going to need to go in there as a unified front and pitch the board on why they should vote no. It's not as simple as having the votes. You actually have to have a direction for the company. And so far, that direction hasn't worked with Kendall and Roman in charge. They need one figurehead. Everybody knows who Kendall's going to look at. And yeah, he does think that he should be in charge. But Roman sheepishly points out that their dad said that he would take it over, even though no one heard that conversation other than Roman. And he's just frustrated at this point. Shiv is also frustrated because she feels like it should be her. And the fact is, Logan Roy told all of them at one point or another that it would be them. The frustration gets to Roman so much that he walks away. And Kendall tells Shiv he doesn't want it. He just can't admit it. And Shiv, I'm sorry, but we can't go in there with a mission statement and a unified front and have you be the face of it because yesterday you were stumping for Matsson. Yeah, look, it has to be me. I'm sorry. It does. It benefits me. I want it. But also, I'm the only option. This is a tough pill to swallow. All three of them head down to the beach where Shiv and Roman speak privately. And they come to the conclusion that Kendall's right. It does have to be him. So they swim out to the barge and they let Kendall know the good news. He will be the king of the castle. When the trio head back the next day to New York City, they're game planning on how to get this deal back. It looks like they have the votes, but they have to just make some phone calls. They also, before the board vote, have to head on over to their dad's place because Connor has arranged this quasi-claiming of all of their dad's property. Willow wants it out of there. They get there, Connor lays out the ground rules on how the hierarchy will work, and then they start going through the house. But when they enter one room, there's a videotape going on of a dinner, which doesn't seem like it was that long ago, with Logan. And they all stop what they're doing and watch this because it's just their dad in his natural element. He's having fun with those that he was closest with, like Jerry, like Carl, like Frank. But it's really the only time where you're going to see all four kids together smiling. At the end of it, they continue to make their rounds around the house, and Tom has arrived. He also is going to be on this claiming thing. And this is the first time that Shiv is seeing or talking to Tom since his meeting with Matsson. So she asks if he's fired, and he totally undersells it. He says, "No, I think I'll be okay." He then wishes her good luck, knowing full well that she won't be CEO. But to his surprise, she says, "Oh, yeah, no, it won't be me. Yeah, I found out that he's stabbing me in the back. Yeah, Greg actually told us." Shiv, thinking in that moment that she could actually trust Tom, kind of ruins everything. Tom asks her if she knows who exactly will be the American CEO, and she gives a bunch of names, but none of them are Tom. And at first, he plays it off like all those names would be equipped, but guilt kind of gets to him, and he finally tells her, "Shiv, it's going to be me. Yeah, you'd find out sooner or later." And man, it pisses her off. She can't believe that Tom would once again stab her in the back. She storms back into the room where Kendall and Roman are, and she says, "It's Tom. Let's go. We got to get back to the office and run our numbers." And they head out. Tom, meanwhile, before he calls up Matsson, decides to go have a little private conversation with Greg in the bathroom. He asks Greg point blank, "Did you tell?" Greg just kind of shakes his head, but Tom yells at him. He tells Greg that he was this close, and now they have a chance of rallying the troops and taking it from him. Now, in Greg's defense, he actually didn't know that he was screwing over Tom. But that doesn't stop the two from getting into a bit of a slap fight. It's adorable. But at the end of it, Tom leaves, and he calls up Matsson and gives him the news. And Matsson starts going into panic mode. A short while later, all three kids enter the Waystar Royco offices, and they're ready to save this deal for their family. They all get into an office together, and Hugo asks for the latest, and Shiv tells him that the Gojo deal is going to die. Kendall then walks over to his father's desk and promises Hugo he's going to get him all the details that he needs. But then right before he sits down, he pauses. He looks at both Roman and Shiv and kind of gets their blessing to sit down in the big chair. And they give it. Stewie then enters the room, and they all kind of question Stewie on if they have his vote. They've all been told that Stewie will vote for him, but, Stewie's kind of a wild card in this whole thing. In order to guarantee that Stewie will vote for Kendall, Kendall suggests that they offer Stewie a chair. Kendall kind of pitches Stewie in his typical cringy Kendall way, and Stewie says, "Yeah, no, we'll think about it. But Shiv, I think if we give Sandy a little bit of a tug, she might be foldable." And Shiv says, "Great, let's go." And the two leave together. As Roman watches those two walk away, he sees Jerry get off the elevator with her lawyers, and it spooks him. He doesn't want to see Jerry, and suddenly Roman doesn't want to see anybody. He actually suggests calling in his vote, which Kendall says, "That's going to be tough to do. People have seen you." He can tell, though, that Roman is having a bit of a meltdown. And what's really bothering Roman is the fact that he feels like people are going to look at him and say, should have been him. Why wasn't he the CEO? Why wasn't he in charge? But Kendall tries to tell him, "Look, man, all of this is just presentation stuff. I mean, it could have easily been you." They then walk out because it's time to meet as the board. And we have no idea what Stewie said to Shiv, or what Shiv said to Sandy, or if they even spoke at all. But when Shiv walks back into that boardroom, she has a different look about her. They all, however, sit down. Frank kicks off the board vote, and it goes exactly as everybody planned it so far. The votes are deadlocked 6-6 until it gets to Shiv. Shiv's vote is going to sway this thing one way or the other, but she doesn't vote. Kendall can't believe it. He doesn't know what's taking her so long, and Shiv finally gets up and walks out, asking for a minute. But Kendall isn't willing to give her a minute. He races after her, and so does Roman. Kendall, Roman, Shiv, they all meet up in a separate conference room, and Kendall asks, what the hell's going on? And Shiv says, I think I changed my mind. Kendall is beside himself. He's livid, he's pissed off, but he also realizes that this thing could be saved, so he starts trying to pitch Shiv on the fact that he is the right person for the job. I mean, he goes from being angry to being desperate to sounding confident, but Shiv tells him, I just don't think you'd be good for this. I love you, but I can't stomach you. When Shiv tells Kendall this, he starts screaming at her. I mean, everybody in the office at this point can hear what he's saying. Once he finally calms down, he starts begging her, telling her that if he's not doing this, he just doesn't know what he is as a person. But she tells him, you can't be CEO. You killed somebody. And that's a fact that Roman certainly forgot, and it takes Kendall completely by surprise. He wasn't expecting her to play that card. But Kendall lies to them. He tells all of them that it was made up. And his story doesn't really make a lot of sense, which gives Roman some pause. He can't believe that his brother would either lie about it or say he's telling the truth, make it up, and use it as a play. He's kind of disgusted at this point. Kendall can tell that he's losing the room, so he screams at Shiv, I am the eldest son, which, by the way, isn't true. And Roman says, yeah, but she has the bloodline. I mean, your kids, they're not really your kids. They were test tube babies. And Kendall gets so mad at that comment that he starts grabbing Roman's face, choking him. Shiv tries to get him to stop for about a second, but then she just tries to leave to go cast her vote. And when she tries to do that, Kendall goes after her. Roman stops Kendall because his sister is pregnant. And it ends with Kendall and Roman wrestling on the ground as Shiv goes to make her vote. About 30-40 seconds later, cooler heads do prevail, and Kendall is still trying to game plan on how to save this thing, not realizing that it's over. Even Roman has just given up. He doesn't care anymore. About a minute later, a pretty disheveled Kendall re-enters the room, and he tries to get them to put the vote on pause, but Frank tells him, Ken, it's over. The vote passed to sell to Gojo. And a very surprised and shocked and disappointed Kendall Roy just turns around and walks out of Waystar Royco for the final time. A couple minutes later, the new CEO, Tom Wambsgans, shows up. Shaking hands, kissing babies. Everybody's walking up to him to congratulate him. People like Stewie, who didn't vote for the deal, congratulate him, say that they're looking forward to him being the lead. Hugo, who was working very closely with Ken's group, also goes up to Tom and congratulates him. But Tom doesn't really want to speak to Hugo. He just is looking for Carolina. So it's not looking good for Hugo's future at the company. Greg sheepishly walks in and congratulates Tom. He starts asking Tom what his plans are, and Tom is planning to axe Carl and Frank. He doesn't want to deal with them anymore. He does, though, want to keep Jerry on board. And Greg nods and asks who else, obviously implying that he wants to know what his future holds at the company. And Tom tells him, you screwed up, man. I mean, you really screwed up. Matsson looks at you like Judas. But I got just enough capital to save you. Because at the end of the day, nothing breaks up the disgusting brothers. The next thing to make this deal official is a photo op that's going to involve a very disgruntled Roman signing the paperwork along with Lucas Matsson. As soon as it's done, Roman gets the hell out of there. He doesn't want to be anywhere near Lucas Matsson. Matsson takes photos with his group along with Tom, Frank, and Carl, and then they celebrate. When it comes time to leave the office, Waystar's new CEO, Tom Wambsgans, gets in the car, and he's not alone. Shiv is with him. She is looking miserable, but she does congratulate Tom, and then Tom puts his hand out, and Shiv puts her hand in his. They drive off into New York City, united. And that is the end of Succession. Thank you so much for getting this part of the recap. I really appreciate it. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit thumbs up if you like this video. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked.
I have a Patreon. I have merch. Go buy a t-shirt. I'm not Waystar. I don't have billions of dollars, but I do have mouths to feed. So that would be cool if you could do that. Be nice in the comment section. If I got something wrong or missed it, you don't have to point it out. It's cool. It happens. Or at least do so in like a nice manner that doesn't make me infuriated. I have kind of a Logan Roy type temper to nasty comments. Anyway, yeah, thank you so much. I do appreciate it.